Queen's Park, Ontario 99.
Good evening, I'm Suhanna Marchand. The ballot boxes are being opened, at least most of them across this province, in 9 ridings. The polling stations are staying open a little bit later. We will go through the reasons, the details for you a little later. We are live at Queen's Park on this election night to reveal the story those votes will tell. This is the building more than 500 candidates are battling to get into as MPPs. Only 103 will be successful. What awaits them inside? Power.
Let's not lose all that we have gained in the last 4 years.
What the election is about, it's not tax systems. It's not even about tax cuts. It's about health care and education.
I have a message for Mike Harris. The ride is over.
Tax cuts create jobs.
I'm interested in restoring our schools, our colleges, our universities.
We're the party that's putting people first.
Get ready to rumble on June the 3rd. June the 3rd.
Queen's Park is in the midst of a $100 million restoration project. Call it a hefty facelift, if you will. Well, we will be watching all the faces that you vote in tonight. Let me tell you about some of the familiar faces you'll see on our program tonight. From CBC Ottawa, host Peter Van Dusen is here, and from CBC Windsor, host Jennifer Gates. And joining me at our CBC results desk, our analyst for this election evening is Robin Smythe. And Robin, this election is already off to a very strange start with some delays at polling stations.
Strange is the last thing you want on an election day. Chaos is the last thing you want, and that's a little bit of what we have. We know certain polls have been delayed opening. By law, that means they have to stay open for 11 hours, so they're going to be delayed closing. We'll have some delays in bringing you some of those results in those 9 ridings, but there are a lot of ridings we will have results in, and we'll bring them to you.
Thank you, Robin. Adam Vaughan has been following this story, this confusing story for us today. And Adam, what's the latest on the polls that are staying open?
Well, there were storm clouds on the horizon yesterday, and today they broke through with a fury, especially in places like Don Valley East. There were 6 polls here that just didn't open up on time. Other polls and stations right across in ridings across this country, the province had problems with all sorts of things like voters lists not showing up, ballot boxes not showing up, polling clerks in Vaughan, Aurora, King City riding, the riding just north of Toronto. There was a huge problem with the fact that 500 polling clerks were threatened by telephone calls over the last week. They didn't show up. There's just chaos everywhere, and that means, as in this riding, as in other ridings across Ontario, polls won't be closing on time. People are still voting here, and we won't have results for at least 2 hours in some of the key polls in this riding.
Thank you, Adam. We are, of course, live at the legislature, but we're not tied down here. From our remotes across Ontario, we'll bring you all the highs and lows, starting with what could be the highest or lowest of them all, the re-election or defeat of the Conservatives. Steve Irwin has been following leader Mike Harris throughout the campaign. He joins us live from party headquarters in North Bay. Steve?
Suhanna, it's starting to fill up here in the hall. There is quite an air of expectation starting. Still, I haven't seen a single politician in here. The Premier is still at home. He's about half an hour away from here, so we're expecting to see him at about 10:30. I was out with him this morning while he was voting, and oddly enough, he said to us then, I think you can see the pictures of him now, he's there with his son. There he is, dropping that ballot in, and just before he dropped the ballot in, he looked over to reporters and said, I hope that there is no problem with this ballot. Well, apparently there is. Nipissing is one of the 9 ridings, as you know, that's had some difficulty up here. We're told that it'll be a half-hour delay here. Well, right. Okay, we'll head back to you, Suhanna.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
So as you heard it, the polls that are affected in Nipissing will close at 8:30. However, the polls that aren't affected will be counting their ballots, so we will have results from Nipissing. Mike Harris is riding about 31 perhaps. The Premier's closest challenger, if you believe the public opinion polls, is Liberal leader Dalton McGuinty. Chris Goldrick is watching his campaign headquarters in Ottawa tonight. Chris.
Thanks to Hannah. Yes, I'm down here at the Civic Centre in Ottawa. Dalton McGuinty is standing by at a hotel to wait to see how things are going to go, and how they're going to go. As we've heard from other reporters, Adam Vaughan, etc., he was saying about the problems that they're having at the polls. Tim Murphy, the president of the Liberal Party, just finished speaking here, and he's saying that the flaws tonight are calling this whole process into question. So it's yet to be seen how this will all work itself out, but Tim Murphy saying that this election result, if close, could be challenged later. So things sound like they're quite unsettled. Now, to get back to the beginning of the day, Dalton McGuinty was in town, made a couple of brief appearances, and voted, spoke to some seniors, and then voted along with his wife, Terry. So that's the scene from here right now. Suhanna, back to you.
Thank you, Chris. And of course, this evening is about numbers. We are tabulating those numbers for you. We've got something called a mini board that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, but let's look at Lanark Carlton first. Norm Sterling there, Robin, who is a cabinet minister.
He's the environment minister right now, and sorry, he's the energy minister. I'm getting that wrong off the top. And this is the first riding in Eastern Ontario. The Conservatives are hoping to hold on to this, but this is where the Liberals are hoping to make some gains this time, because Liberals have been strong in Eastern Ontario before.
Now, when we look at these early results, what they're really telling you is that people are voting and ballots are being counted. In the biggest riding of all, Kenora Rainy River at the Red Dog Inn in Fort Frances, Percy Hatfield is live with the New Democrats covering leader Howard Hampton. Percy?
So, Hannah, this is a great night up here. I'll tell you why it's so good. The NDP just don't know what's going to happen tonight. The riding boundaries have been changed across the province, as you know, and they've been having trouble throughout this election just guessing on actually how many seats they're going to get. And they do admit, finally, that it is a guess, and it all depends on the turnout. Howard Hampton was out early. He voted today with his parents, and he was guessing widely. He was saying, you know, we might have 25, 30 seats tonight, and other people in the party were saying, well, perhaps not that well. Maybe they say the worst case scenario is just 8 or 9 seats. But they say a lot depends on the boundaries, and most of all, Hannah, they said the voter turnout today. If they can get out the identified NDP vote, then they think they'll do really well tonight.
Thank you, Percy. Well, voters certainly did turn out, because we've got numbers coming in here through our CBC decision desk over to Oakville in the 905 area, and Gary Carr. Robin?
Gary Carr is the incumbent here. He's a former NHLer. He's also been a very vocal voice from the back benches of the Conservative government. A little bit disappointed he didn't end up around the cabinet table. He's made his opinions known.
Over in Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, and Sean Conway, who is looking, of course, to come back to Queen's Park. He's been here for several terms already, but again, these results show us with 9 votes, 8 votes, and 6 votes, the people are voting, and those ballots, of course, are being counted. Let me explain the mini board at the bottom of your screen. This is the way it works. We call it a leading and elected board. The Conservatives, at this point, are leading or elected, and early, of course, in the night, they're just leading with 2 ridings, and the Liberals as well with 2 ridings. You'll see numbers for the New Democrats as well as NDP on the bottom of that board, and perhaps if there's an independent, as there was in 1995 with Peter North, we'll see that come up on the mini board as well. Now, leaders don't become premiers until a lot of other politicians in their party are elected, and we will be, throughout the evening, counting your votes to see who, in fact, is elected to sit around those leaders at Queen's Park. We've got some more numbers for you as those votes are being counted at polling stations across the province, minus, of course, those 9 ridings we talked about a little bit earlier, and Nipissing being one of those. In Prince Edward Hastings, Robin?
We're looking for the race here. The incumbent is Gary Fox for the Conservatives. This is early yet, we should mention that, and of course the board at the bottom showing us the leading and elected. Leading is more important at this point because we don't have anyone elected yet, but those numbers are going to continue to change. We know that some of those Conservatives numbers coming in are from the Toronto belt and one in Eastern Ontario.
Margaret Marlin here in Mississauga South, hoping to come back, of course. She was Mike Harris's choice for Speaker. Chris Tocqueville, of course, got that job.
But she's also able to have some bragging rights. She won with one of the biggest margins in 1995. That's considered a safe seat for the Conservatives.
Let's go up to the north with one of 181 polls reporting at this point. Sault Ste. Marie, by the way, despite the redrawing of the ridings, is the only one that managed to keep its boundaries, so we can call Martin an incumbent in this case, truly. Algoma, Manitoulin, again way up north and early yet. But Lynn Watson, she had something to do with Bud Wildman, her campaign manager, and he held this seat for 7 terms for the New Democrats.
That's right. A lot of this riding, we've mentioned that the ridings have been redrawn, so in a lot of cases you have MPPs who are running in areas they haven't run in before, but a part of this riding was Bud Wildman's riding, NDP stronghold. Another part of it obviously was Liberal. We got the incumbent, Mr. Brown.
Nickel Belt, this of course is Shelley Martel, the wife of Howard Hampton, and with only one poll reporting so far, let's tell you a little bit about this riding rather than the numbers, because it would be silly to analyze these numbers at this point.
In fact, we know there are only about 200 votes across the entire province that have been counted at this point. Nickel Belt is a riding that was held by Floyd Loughran. He was a treasurer in Bob Rae's government in 1990, a longtime MPP.
He resigned to head up the Energy Board. Let me just tell you before we go anywhere about this mini board, we can see the Conservatives are sitting now at leading and elected in 5 seats, the Liberals are 4, and there's the New Democrats. I mentioned they would eventually show up on the screen leading in 2 ridings. The numbers will, of course, tell the story tonight, but our election insiders of the evening have a few stories of their own. They'll share them throughout this evening with my colleague from CBC Ottawa, Peter Van Dusen.
Well, to our invited guests, panelists, what are your first impressions of the numbers you've seen so far? Of course, we have nobody elected yet. We do have the PCs leading in 5, Liberals in 5, and NDP in 2. What do you think of what you're seeing so far, David?
Well, I had a curious sense of deja vu. I was sitting there watching.
I know you would like this to be the David Peterson decision desk.
And I was just saying, Peter, in 1990, when we lost the election, we were winning for the first half hour. All the numbers were coming in from Eastern Ontario, and it looked pretty good, and we were going to defy all the predictions. So all I can tell you is, whatever you're seeing so far, don't get too excited, don't get too depressed, because it's got nothing to do with reality. Right. I mean, well, 20 minutes we should have, or 15 or 20 minutes.
And we are seeing history repeats itself to the extent that we're seeing some numbers coming early
I would
from
agree
Eastern
with David,
Ontario.
it's far too early, but what's interesting from just what we have seen is that in the North, the presumption that it would be a fight between the Liberals and the New Democrats and that the Conservatives would not make gains in the North on the basis of 1 poll per riding does seem to be bearing out.
Well, that's a little thin to make the whole new judgment about
I'm just a little disappointed. I thought David was going to declare a winner here.
He
wants to beat you guys, and I thought this was it.
But he can. It's now 7 Liberals to 6 Conservatives.
We'll leave that, David, if it's okay to the technology of the people crunching those numbers over there. As much as I know you'd like to
tell us when they're going to do it, and the 3 of us will decide ahead of time and tell you.
We'll do that for you.
Give us 30 seconds warning.
Thank you, Peter. Did I hear David Peterson say this wasn't exciting? Come on, David. Get excited. Well, let's have a look and get excited ourselves with some numbers that we've got coming in through our CBC decision desk. We'll go over to Scarborough Agincourt, where we have 2 seeking re-election here. Of course, Jerry Phillips, and Jim Brown, who was co-commissioner on the Crime Commission until he was ousted from there. But a little bit about this riding, Robin.
Scarborough Agincourt is expected to be held by Jerry Phillips, a strong, long-time member from the Liberals. Jim Brown's an interesting candidate, though. We know that for the Crime Commissioner, as a Crime Commissioner, he made some comments about the Santa Claus Parade, that it was the busiest day for prostitutes. That got him into some trouble. In fact, he's not even running in part of the riding that used to be his. He's moved on further east to take on Jerry Phillips.
Bob Frankfurt, the NDP there, but we saw a GP. That means Green Party, by the way. If you see that on the board, that's what it means. Over in Hamilton Mountain, another sitting MPP.
This is that's Trevor Pettit, is a sitting MPP. This is one of the ridings that have been targeted by the anti-Harris forces for what we call strategic voting. And what they're doing in certain 29 ridings where they think the Conservatives are vulnerable is they're choosing one candidate, the Liberals or the NDP, trying to pool all the votes behind that one candidate to defeat the Conservatives. In this riding, that would be, I've missed it now, one of the Hamilton ridings.
Let's have a look at York North and Julia Munro, former parliamentary secretary to the Premier, elected in 1995. But let me point out before we go any further, this mini board at the bottom. 10 seats, the Liberals leading in, the Conservatives 8, the New Democrats with 3. This is our mini board. We call it leading and elected. Back to John Volpe, perhaps, with the Liberals.
He was a former principal. He also was a principal at a school that Mike Harris visited himself during the 1995 election, and Mr. Volpe was involved in the Liberal campaign this time with Dalton McGuinty to say that Mr. Harris didn't keep his promises.
We will be looking, of course, at the ridings in Toronto and outside. Here's one in the 905 with Oshawa, which, of course, went blue in 1995.
After a strong NDP tradition. If we look at the bottom, we see the Liberals elected and leading in 12 ridings, the Conservatives in 10. But we have to mention it's very early days at this point. There are only about 900 votes that have been counted all across the province, so it's too early to tell. We'll be watching those numbers at the bottom to see if we can see a trend.
Let's go over now to, first another riding in Thunder Bay, Atikokan. And this is Lynn McLeod. She is the former leader of the Liberal Party. Of course, we have David Peterson over there going poo-poo to everything, but Lynn McLeod certainly is probably excited, despite the fact this is only one of 171 polls reporting.
Considered one of the safest seats for the Liberals in the province.
In Hamilton West, then, we have D'Amico. Can't remember his first name, can you?
And Dave Christopherson is there for the NDP. He's an incumbent as well. He's the incumbent as well as Lillian Roth. They're facing off in Hamilton West, and I can tell you in Hamilton West...
Frank D'Amico, that's it. It came to me. Hastings, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington. You know what this riding is? It's the riding with the longest name of the 103, Robin, and with 224 polls reporting. We can't call it, but we can certainly tell you that information. Harry Danford here
is ahead, where we've only got one poll in again. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see the numbers and elected and leading, but we're still early days.
We've got a leader here. Howard Hampton in Kenora, Rainy River. There was some question about whether he could hold on to this riding, but here he is above and over Frank Micklash, the Liberal, who is also seeking re-election to Queen's Park.
Early days, that's the biggest riding in the province, Suhana, in terms of size, but it also has the smallest population. Howard Hampton has to campaign across the province for his party. Frank Micklash, another incumbent there, is focusing on the riding.
Well, we certainly don't have to go way up north for the Victory Cafe. We just go over to Mike Wise, who was in Toronto. Mike?
Thanks, Suhana. I'm standing here with Renee Jansen. He is a secondary school teacher at Pope John Paul Secondary School in Scarborough. He was helping out today with a number of the ridings that teachers in the Toronto area had targeted with strategic voting, helping out campaign managers there that were looking for some help. You had a unique perspective here. What sort of problems were you encountering in terms of the vote today?
Well, one of the calls we got, a campaign office couldn't get a hold of the forms they need to get the scrutineers into to their places, so we had to run off to get those. And we had a unique experience there because when we got to the returning office, they didn't have the forms, and they were on the phone telling, I could hear them giving instructions to some of their polls, saying there was some mix-up about the location, and they were insisting if it was poll 75, 76, whatever, make sure they vote there. I don't care what it says on the polls. We ended up going from there to the next returning office, and we were able to get some forms there and run them back to the candidates who needed them.
Which riding was that?
That was in Scarborough Centre.
Okay. Now, how about actually getting people out to vote? What sort of lineups did you hear stories about?
Early in the morning, we heard that some of the polls had opened late, and we heard that there were lineups early in the morning, even though there weren't a lot of people. There apparently was a lot of confusion in some of the locations.
Okay, Renee, thank you. Suhana, back to you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And you want to know two things tonight, of course. Who's going to be the premier and who is going to win your riding? Let's find out. Some more ridings for you. Timmins, James Bay. And
Gilles Bisson is the incumbent here, and he's up against two other candidates. It's important for the NDP to do well in the north. Under redistribution, there are fewer northern ridings. The NDP is looking to hold on to most of them.
This is the second largest riding as well. It's got a fairly large francophone population as well. Of course, the largest riding, Kenora Rainy River. In Glengarry Prescott Russell, we can go over to Peter Van Dusen, who is from Eastern Ontario, to tell us all about these two Lalondes. Peter?
The incumbent there.
Thanks, Johanna. This is Jean-Marc Lalonde, who is the sitting Liberal MPP in Glengarry Prescott Russell. He's up again. It's the only riding in the province, I'm sure, where two of the candidates have the same name. So you've got Jean-Marc Lalonde running against Alain Lalonde, who's the Chief of Staff for the Agriculture Minister, Noble Villeneuve. So the early results coming in, 5 of 211 polls here. You see it coming in, and Jean-Marc Lalonde is in the lead and hoping to come back to Queen's Park, of course, for another term. Sienna?
Thanks, Peter. 17 ridings in Eastern Ontario. We will be watching all of them, and Peter will be giving you his neck of the woods comments as well. Over to Cambridge now, and this is between London and Toronto. Auto industry pretty key here. One poll only reporting, so we can't make too big a deal out of it. But Jerry Martinook is the incumbent.
That's right. It's still early days, as you mentioned. If we look at the leading and elected board at the bottom, it looks like a neck-and-neck race between the Liberals and the Conservatives, but it's still really early.
This is what we're looking for, Robin, that little check mark. If you see it up in the box in the left-hand corner, it means that Lynn McLeod has been elected in Thunder Bay, Atikokan. You mentioned earlier, this is not a surprise. We're hearing clapping from the East Wing here at Queen's Park, so obviously some Liberals in our public guest section. This is only with 10 polls, but our decision desk is pretty darn good, and they can tell us and project who will be elected by you. Over to Trinity Spadina, a Toronto riding.
This is a Toronto riding where we're looking at Rosiera Marchese. This is considered to be one of the safe seats for the New Democrats, one of the ones in Toronto they'd like to hold on to. At this point, with just one poll reporting, it's too early to make any kind of predictions. But the New Democrats, if we look at the bottom, are leading and elected in 5. They're hoping to get to 12 by the end of the night to hold on to official party status.
Marcel Beaubien, hoping to come back, but at this point, only one poll again reporting. But native reserves here, and one of them is in the disputed Ipperwash area in this riding.
That's right. There was some controversy over that during the government's term.
Before we get to Durham, let's take a look at this mini board, the leading and elected board, the Conservatives now, and you will see these numbers flip throughout the night. Perhaps the Conservatives will have a little bit more of the Liberals. The NDP, well, you know, we've been watching the polls, and they are at this point at 5 seats leading or elected, and at this point just leading. Over to Durham and the 905.
These are some of the seats that Conservatives, of course, were very strong in last time, and they're hoping to hold on to a lot of these ones, Suhanna. We'll have to keep an eye on it.
John O'Toole, first elected in 1995. He wants a second term here at Queen's Park. In Chatham, Kent, Essex, this is a bellwether riding. Let's take the time and explain to our viewers what this term really means, Robin.
A bellwether riding is one of the ridings that we really keep an eye on as a reliable indicator of who's going to be the big winner at the end of the night. They're ridings that tend to elect the MPPs from the party, which then at the end of the night forms the government. So we can watch this one closely. Right now, too early to call. Pretty close race between 2 sitting MPPs.
Pat Hoy and Jack Carroll, of course. He should probably have a little X beside his name as well. In Kitchener-Waterloo, Elizabeth Whitmer territory here. She won in 1990 and 95. Now the health minister, and of course that is the biggest concern of voters in Ontario is health care. How do you look at this board?
This one's a little bit early to tell. I like looking at the bottom of the board at this point where we have 20 Conservatives leading and elected, 19 Liberals, and 5 New Democrats. They're all looking for that magic number, of course, of 52. That would mean a Conservative or a majority government.
Any party that gets 52 will be a majority government. One other number that's very important to point out tonight is the number 12, and that would mean official party status. Some would say that's what the New Democrats are looking for tonight. In Mississauga East, the 905, this was painted blue in the last election.
This is one of 4 ridings in Mississauga. 3 of them the Liberals have high hopes in, and in fact those strategic voting coalition that's trying to oust the Conservatives has targeted 3 of them as ridings they believe the Liberals can win. This is one of them.
And they've targeted Sean Pata.
That's right. They've endorsed the Liberal candidate here and are asking voters to vote for him, even if they're New Democrat supporters.
Over in Parry Sound, Muskoka, Algonquin Park, of course, here, and Ernie Eves, we all know Ernie Eves, the finance minister. He came out with his last budget, just the day before the election was called, and I think on that day I said, so, Mr. Eves, do you know when will the election be called? He didn't say a word.
He wouldn't tell you.
He wouldn't tell me.
I don't think that's unusual, but what is a little bit unusual that Mr. Eves is running again. There was some concern among the Conservative Party anyway that he wasn't going to run. He's been talked into it.
I'd like to take a little bit of time with this board to give our viewers a sense of what it means, because there are a lot of numbers on the screen. We're looking at the vote change. So the 47%, 32%, and 19% is the total vote for the parties at this point. The change column, though, Robin, can you explain that? Because that's crucial.
This is crucial. This is what the parties are looking at. The Conservatives aren't necessarily looking for a plus sign in this column. If they stay at 0, there's no change from last time round, they get another Conservative majority. But if this type of trend holds up, we're looking at a major upset at minus 14 percentage points from the last election.
These numbers, of course, speak to polls. Polls, we've seen them throughout this campaign. Jennifer Gates has a pollster. Jennifer.
Thanks very much, Suhanna. Indeed, I'm here in the East Wing of Queen's Park, and I'm joined by Jane Armstrong, the Vice President of Environics. She, of course, has been involved in taking a number of the polls for the CBC throughout this election campaign. Thanks for being with us. It's still very early in this race, but we're starting to see a picture develop.
Yes, well, I guess we are.
A little picture.
A little picture. what we've seen in our polls, in the last 2 polls that we've done for the CBC in this campaign, is that it looked like it would be a tight race. You know, we saw that in our last poll that the Liberals and the Tories were really only separated by 1 point. Very interesting.
And tell me how the chaos, if you will, in some of the ridings at some of the polling stations is going to play out and impact the numbers tonight, impact the vote.
Well, it's hard to say because I guess the idea is that some people will be turned off and maybe not come back to vote. We don't know if Liberals or Conservatives or NDP supporters would be more likely to be turned off by this, so it's hard to say what the impact would be.
We'll be watching it closely. Suhana?
Thank you, Jennifer. Cabinet ministers, we've got one here sitting over there. Charlie Hardick, I can see you smiling over there. Hello to you. They're, of course, a very important part of what goes on here at Queen's Park. We've got some numbers to look at Mike Harris and his cabinet ministers to see how well they're doing in this election. First, Mike Harris's riding, and Nipissing, of course, up in the north. He is leading over George Maroussis, a longtime municipal councillor who, in fact, I believe, started out as a Conservative, said he didn't like the CSR and became a Liberal. Wendy Young is the New Democrat there. We were talking about cabinet ministers, and of course in St. Paul's, Isabel Bassett, one of those.
Again, we're looking at early times, but Michael Bryant is hoping for an upset here. Isabel Bassett was the culture minister going into this election, still is the culture minister until we have a new government.
Parry Sound, Muskoka. We talked about Ernie Eves and his refusal to let us know here at CBC when this election date was going to be called. But with 10 of 204 polls reporting our decision desk, I'm giving them a lot of credit. They're fabulous, so I know we're going to have who you elected there soon? Halliburton, Victoria Brock. Chris Hodgson, another cabinet minister.
He's chair of management board at this point. He's been moving his ways up the ranks, and he's a favorite in the Conservative government at this point. Maybe a future leadership contender at some point.
The mini board is flipped, by the way. If you've been watching at home, you'll notice that the Conservatives now have, well, you know, it changes as we speak. 31 leading and elected. The Liberals, 23 seats leading or elected. In Mississauga Centre, another cabinet minister.
That's right. We have Rob Sampson in charge of privatization. This is one of the ridings I mentioned earlier that's being targeted by the Strategic Voting Coalition. They're hoping that Mr. Winter, George Winter, has a better chance here. When we look at that bottom board, the 31-23-5, it's early times yet, as we mentioned. These are leading and elected, but that is closer to what we saw in some of the opinion polls leading up to this vote.
This board's certainly not about a Conservative. We know this man, Dalton McGuinty, the leader of the Liberal Party, and in his riding of Ottawa South, he is leading. We can go to Peter Van Dusen, and Peter, perhaps you can tell us more about Ottawa South.
Well, I can tell you that clearly Dalton McGuinty, you know, needs desperately to win that, of course, to maintain leadership of the party, one would think. And he's been in touch with David Peterson as well for advice, I'm sure, during the campaign. Tell me a little bit about these results we're seeing now and what you expect to see as we continue to move across the province, David.
Well, first of all, you have to understand that McGuinty's got enough relatives in that riding to win the election, so he's a sure thing. I'll declare him elected already. A trend is starting to develop here, but I don't think we should. I don't think we can draw too many conclusions at this point. I think the popular vote figures are sort of out of whack with at this point with the winning and losing in the riding. So I just give us another 5 or 10 minutes. We can be far more intelligent. Rather not say something stupid now, Peter.
Well, you don't want to do that. Charles, go ahead.
It was interesting, Peter, because it was a quick flash of the popular vote a second ago, and it started to change. And the numbers are starting to move around a little bit. So I suspect that things are starting to solidify.
But there's still areas where we haven't seen anything out of the Niagara Peninsula area yet. So there's parts of the province where we haven't got any results, and I think it's really very early to draw conclusions, though maybe this is a trend.
Well, and we'll continue to see how that trend develops as we continue to bring in more numbers here from our CBC coverage at Queen's Park. Let's go back to the desk and Suhana.
Thank you, Peter. Well, we've got numbers and numbers pouring in, except, of course, from those 9 ridings where the polls will close late. Chatham, Kent, Essex, a bellwether riding. And Jack Carroll and Pat Hoy, of course, both looking to come back to Queen's Park because both were here before. Elgin Middlesex, London. This is the riding where Peter North, the only independent to sit in this House, of course, elected in 1995, was. He is not running anymore, but one poll reporting. Can you tell us anything else about this riding, Robin?
Elgin Middlesex London has, I can tell you that there aren't any incumbents here because Peter North isn't running again. And that means there's no name recognition, no face recognition. All of these folks are going to be going hard at the polls. At the bottom of the screen on the mini board, it's 31-28-5 at this point. Essex is a riding for Bruce Crozier, is the incumbent, and Mr. O'Neill running against Mr. Richards. That's at the far southern tip of Ontario.
And over in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, we saw this just a little bit earlier. Marcel Beaubien has not moved from second position there, with 6 of those polls reporting at this point. Look at this mini board now. We have numbers that match: 30 for the Conservatives, 30 leading and elected for the Liberals, and 5 seats for the New Democrats. Let's go to Chris Goldrick in Ottawa, where he is at the headquarters of Dalton McGuinty. Chris?
Thank you very much, Sue Hannah. Joining me now, Tim Murphy, the president of the Liberal Party. First of all, Tim, thanks for coming on. Can you talk to me a little bit about the race as you see it so far?
Oh yeah, well we think obviously the campaign we saw a Dalton McGuinty who showed he could be a fighter and showed he could be premier, and as you can see in the results, I think that message has been getting out. We think it's going to be a close race and a long night.
Okay. The next question is we've heard about some of the chaos at polling stations around the province. I believe it's between 7 and 11. I know that your party has some views on this, and I guess they're pretty serious. Can you tell me about that?
Well, I think it's very serious when we are having people voting after results have been announced. So we think that's wrong and against every tradition in this province. We've called for an official investigation of how that could have happened. And frankly, that could throw into doubt results in ridings. And depending on how close it is, it could throw into doubt the result in the election. And the election process shouldn't do that. So we need to have this fixed. I think there's a good argument that you can lay this at the feet of Mike Harris and his government. He unilaterally changed the rules. We said that it was wrong. We identified a way to fix it, and that wasn't done.
Okay, I better leave it there. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Back to you, Sue Hannah. That's the situation from here.
Thank you, Chris. We'll come back to you throughout the evening. Look at this beautiful shot. Here we are inside Her Majesty's Park. If you were to walk up those stairs and come in these big oak wooden doors, you would see us sitting in the lobby of this park. A wonderful, wonderful building. This is where everyone's fighting to get into, of course, and there will be 103 of them by the end of the evening going upstairs to the legislative chamber at some point. Well, numbers. It's all about who wins, who loses tonight, not who gets the award, as they say at the academies. Let's look at this PC ridings. And Robin, can you take us through this board?
This board is looking at the 72 ridings. If we were to transpose those votes from the last election over the newly drawn ridings, the Conservatives would hold 72 of those ridings. And what it's showing us is how many they're leading in and how many they're elected. And the Liberals are ahead in 14 of them. Leading in 14 of them, the Conservatives are leading in 30 of them of 72. The NDP is down at about 2. This explains why the Liberals' numbers are so high on that bottom board, the leading and elected, at about 30 compared to the Conservatives' 32.
Because I guess the Liberals are taking away 14 of those seats. Is that the way we would look at it? The Democrats taking 2 away from the traditional conservative
ridings, that's right, but we should... This is the vote change. This is an interesting riding as well when we're talking about the total vote. We see the Liberals picking up 9 percentage points, and you have to remember these are in Conservative ridings. The Conservatives have lost 4 percentage points in their own ridings. The NDP are down minus 8 percentage points as well. If we look at that bottom column, the New Democrats only have 6 seats.
I know at home it looks like a lot of numbers, but these percentages are really, really crucial to understand because they can show us and help us to decide what kind of government this is going to be.
We should mention, though, we're still waiting for some important ridings to the Conservatives, and those are, we only have 0.08% of the polls in from the Toronto belt, where the Conservatives are very strong, and 0.04% of the polls from Toronto, which has a lot of ridings.
And Toronto, of course, is one of the, or some of the ridings, of course, in Toronto the Conservatives wish to take. Up to North Bay, forget about Toronto for a while, let's go way up north to Steve Irwin in the Mike Harris headquarters. Steve?
Thanks, Sue Hannah. Right now I'm joined with Bill King. He was a senior staffer with the Premier for many years, a close personal friend of the Premier's for many years. You've had some work on this campaign, but I understand not too much. But just asking you tonight, the room seems to be getting quite excited here. How do you think it's going so far?
Well, I think here in Nipissing it's been a fairly competitive race, but I have every expectation that the Premier will win his seat here in Nipissing, and people are looking at the tallies coming in across the province, and the mood is very good.
Well, what's looking at those tallies yourself, does it take you back to last time around when you were very intimately involved with the election?
Sure does. I'm at that stage of every election where you're nervous and you have the butterflies and you're looking for good news to come across the screen.
And you're feeling that tonight?
Yep.
Okay, thanks so much. Back to you, Suhanna.
Okay, Steve. More numbers for you, because this is a night about numbers and, of course, about emotion. We can't forget about that, and surprises. Here is another elected for the Conservatives, so you'll see it change on the screen. The little check mark means that Dunlop has been elected in Simcoe North.
We're looking at the bottom board again, the elected and leading. We see a jump just as we're speaking, and again, these numbers will go back and forth. But the Conservatives leading or elected in 39 ridings, the Liberals in 32. With the New Democrat vote down around 6, it's what the Liberals would like to see, and that's where the Liberal support might be coming from if they're not splitting that anti-Harris vote.
Margaret Marland, elected in Mississauga South. She recently had a heart attack and quadruple bypass heart surgery, I believe, and she has come back, and she will be back at Queen's Park for the voters in Mississauga South. To Timmins, James Bay, another elected here. This is Gilles Bisson, but elected for the New Democrats.
This is the first New Democrat we've elected tonight, or that our decision desk is projecting it will be elected coming back to Queen's Park. That's important, as we mentioned, in the North, for the New Democrats to hold on to their support there, even though there are fewer ridings to run it.
Parry Sound, Muskoka. Are you surprised by this one? Ernie Eves will be coming back. And what portfolio, Robin, do you think Ernie Eves will be coming back to?
I think there's a good chance, as a good friend of the Premier and a close confidant, that he may be Deputy Speaker again, maybe Finance Minister. Ernie had a nickname.
That, of course, depends on whether the government will be conservative that Mr. Eves gets into cabinet, because, of course, only the government can form its own cabinet. Maybe he'll be a critic. We'll wait to see, because that, of course, is what we want to watch tonight, that crucial call for you. And the North. Now, these are more boards that we can show how the elected and leading are changing. And can you take us through this one, Robin?
Looks like the Liberals and New Democrats, who held a lot of these ridings in the North after the 95 election, are still holding on to the lead here. 4 leading and elected in 4, leading and elected for the NDP in 4, and the Conservatives are only leading in 1, elected in none at this point.
And over to Sudbury, Rick Bartolucci. This is for the Liberals, and that little arrow, you know, it's a little hard to see with the red, but keep an eye for it, viewers at home, because Rick Bartolucci, if you live in this riding, will be your representative at Queen's Park for the next 5-year term. Way up to the north again, and this is
Algoma, Manitoulin. We're still looking at early results at this point. We haven't. Our decision just hasn't elected anyone at this point. This is Mike Brown for the Liberals, who is hoping to hold on to this seat, or hoping to win this seat, rather. We don't have an incumbent in this seat.
Mining territory, everybody there digging for gold. Of course, gold being a seat in the Legislative Chamber. Another one of those little check marks. And this is in Temiskaming Cochrane.
David Ramsey will be the MPP for Temiskaming Cochrane for the Liberals. A long time ago, more than 10 years ago, Mr. Ramsey was a New Democrat.
And he crossed over to the Liberals in 85, I believe.
And he's one of those politicians who's made it work.
Percy Hatfield is with the New Democrats as we watch these check marks go by our screen. I love saying this. He's at the Red Dog Inn. Percy.
Hi, Suhanna. Yes, and I'm with Gail Broad. She's from Sault Ste. Marie, and she's the president of the NDP. And I want to know anything surprising there so far tonight in the returns.
In the returns that I've been looking at and watching on television, as everybody else is, I guess, so far I haven't seen a lot of really big surprises. Of course, it's very early in the results, and some of the ridings I'm not sure which polls they're talking about, you know, which polls have reported. When you're talking 5 or 10 polls out of 130 or 140 polls, it's hard to know which polls have reported, and so whether there may be some changes in alignment of the votes. For example, in Algoma, Manitoulin, depending on which end of the riding those results may be coming in, they may look very different by the end of the night.
What do you know about the results in this riding so far?
Again, I don't know exactly where the results are coming from, although I know that a couple of the polls were polls that we were concerned about because they were coming from Mick Lash's home turf. So those were ones where we felt Howard had to hold his own, and so far it certainly looks like Howard is holding his own in the ones he needs to, and is doing very well in the ones that we expected him to do well.
How many seats are you going to win tonight?
Well, we're certainly going to have party status at the end of the night.
Thank you. Going back to the desk, thank you.
Percy, thank you. We are ready to make the call. Our CBC decision desk is projecting a Conservative majority government. It's the moment we have all been waiting for to hear this. Once again, our CBC decision desk is projecting a Conservative majority government. Michael Dean Harris has led the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario since May 12, 1990. He became the 22nd Premier in 1995. The father of two lives in North Bay. When he graduated from high school there, he said his ambition was to become Prime Minister. Well, tonight, he becomes the first Conservative Premier to win back-to-back majorities since 1967.
Let's keep Ontario on the right track, my friends. Thank you very much.
We saw that Premier's office earlier. Mr. Harris will be back there. Let's go through how this call, this projection of a Conservative majority was made. Some pretty crucial figures to look at. The vote change board, Robin, being the most crucial.
And if we look in the blue line there, the Conservative line, what we see is that at this point, the Conservatives have about 42% of the total vote. They only had 45% of the total vote last time, and they won a majority, so they're only down slightly. The change is for about 4 percentage points. But what they're noticing is that the New Democrats are down to about 14% of the total vote. And again, the end of the night isn't here yet, but that's a downward change of about 7 percentage points. That's not good for the New Democrats, because in the past 3 decades, no party in this three-party system has won less than about 20% of the total vote. Not good news.
If the Liberals, of course, hold at above 40, it'll be the first time that party has reached in the 40 percentile since David Peterson in 1987 with his majority government.
This board shows us why our decision desk can project a Conservative majority, and that's because we don't see much change in the Conservative ridings. Again, all they needed to do was hold on to those ridings to have another majority.
Well, when we made that call of a Conservative majority, there was one man clapping over there. It was Charlie Harnick. Let's find out what he's thinking with Peter Van Dusen. Peter?
Suhanna, fair to say to the victor go the spoils, I guess. So, Charles Harnick, what do you say?
Assuming it's right. Assuming it's right.
We'll assume it's right. That's the projection we made.
I think it's a pretty historic moment in the sense that it's the first back-to-back majority governments we've seen in Ontario since 1967. And I think that alone is historic in nature. I think it's interesting also to reflect on the fact that that a majority of seats reflects that very much what the Premier and the Progressive Conservative Party have been saying is very much the mainstream of Ontario thought today.
This tells you, presumably, that the people of Ontario have bought the Mike Harris message again and wanted another 5 years of what he's doing.
I think people understood the message. I think they could see that the program was working. It was creating good benefits for the people of Ontario, jobs in the economy, provide the means to invest in healthcare and education. And I think that was mainstream thought here. And I think it also shows that what happened in 1995 was no fluke.
Okay, Ruth Greer, what's ahead for the province of Ontario from your perspective?
Well, I think certainly congratulations are due to the Premier. It is quite an achievement to have had a back-to-back majority, and I don't think he really changed much during the campaign. He started out fairly high and has maintained a very steady pace. What's in store for the province? Well, the Premier has promised 5 more years of the common sense revolution. I think what will be interesting will be the size of the opposition. It'll be majority, but it'll be, and the mix of the opposition will say how much about how, in fact, he's going to govern.
David, do the demonstrators go away? Is it smooth sailing for Mike Harris?
No, I don't think necessarily, but I also think Michael's an intelligent politician. I mean, he'll understand that one of his first jobs is to try to build those bridges. I mean, in a sense, the fight's over. I mean, assuming he's won tonight, now his job is to put the pieces back together, and he will do that, I'm sure. Because at the end of the day, you can only govern with the consent of the people you're governing, and he's going to want to bring everybody back into the tent. And I expect you would see conciliatory noises. I mean, it has been a tough fight, but now we're on to a new round, and everybody's got to pull together, and everybody's got a responsibility to make this place great.
Well, given the record of the last 4 years, where there was no attempt made to build bridges or conciliate.
We'll have to break away for a second. We'll continue the conversation here. Let's go back to Suhanna, and we'll touch base with our panelists in a little bit.
Thank you, Peter. Well, Premier Harris has been elected in his riding up north in Nipissing, and as you know, a Conservative majority government. Let's look at the leaders to see where they stand. First of all, Mike Harris, as we mentioned, over George Maroussas, and this forms part of the majority. He doesn't even have to move those pictures off his desk in the office.
And we look at our leading and elected board at the bottom. We have the Conservatives edging towards that number. We talked about that 52 magic number. They're at 50 right now, and they're going to pass that 52 number.
Over to Howard Hampton. He has been elected. There was some concern about whether he would hold this seat up north in Kenora Rainy River, but that check mark means Howard Hampton will also be coming back to Queen's Park, but we know which side of the House he will be sitting on at this point.
By my count, that's only 2 New Democrats we've elected at this point.
Ottawa South, this is the only leader who has not yet been elected, but he is leading in his riding of Ottawa South. We've got a party happening here, as we told you, and we can go to Jennifer Gates to find out just how happening it is in the East Wing. Jennifer?
Well, in fact, Suhanna, there is a lot happening in the East Wing. Some of it is joyous, some of it is not. Joining me now are 2 of our invited guests tonight. Barb Wall is the president of the Ontario Nurses Association, and Michael Perot is a Conservative supporter. I'll start with you, Barb, to get your reaction. Clearly, this is not what the Nurses Association was hoping for.
This is not what we were hoping for, but I'm extremely proud of our nurses, because our nurses have been out there, have been active, and our nurses have held this government accountable and will continue to do that. They will be checking to see whether the promises are kept. They'll be checking to see whether the patients of Ontario get the care that they need. And we'll be there in every MPP's office on a regular basis to make that happen.
What do you think this will mean in health care, in the hospitals in this province, to nurses, to patients?
For patients of Ontario, we've said right along over the last few years that patients are increasingly at risk. We're concerned about that. We'll continue to be concerned, but we will continue to push to make sure that the patients of Ontario get the best care they deserve.
And you have been supporting the Conservatives throughout all of those changes, Michael.
Well, there are a few things that they could have done differently, but I guess my feel is that he did what he said he was going to do. He told us what he was going to do, and then he went out and did it. And obviously there's enough people out there that believe that what he's doing is the right thing.
Okay, and certainly we'll be watching as the race continues to develop tonight. Suhanna.
Thank you, Jennifer. We know where they are smiling, big, broad smiles tonight. Look at that number on the mini board at the bottom of your screen. The Conservatives leading and elected in 53 seats. The magic number is 52, and the New Democrats at 9, the Liberals at 27. But let's go way up to North Bay, and Steve Irwin, are you finding those smiles?
Suhanna, it's more than a little smile up here. Just a ripple of cheering went through this crowd just a few moments ago when Mr. Harris actually was declared the winner in his riding. I'm joined now with Barb Minot, Mr. Harris's campaign manager here in Nipissing and a close personal friend of the Premier for more than 2 decades. He was best man at their wedding and vice versa. I just will ask you now, Ms. Minot, how do you feel? We have a Tory majority, second Tory majority here, first time in years and years. What's going on in your mind right now?
Well, you know, I'm just a volunteer and I'm an Ontario citizen, and I really believe strongly in what Mike Harris has put forward in terms of values and in terms of platform. And I want Ontario to be strong, and I think Mike Harris can make Ontario stronger, and so I'm thrilled. We worked hard too.
I bet you did. What pushed it over, do you think, so quickly?
I think that people understand he had some very, very difficult things to do in terms of restructuring, and I think that people also appreciate that without revenues, you can't do the kind of restructuring that you need to do. So I think it's an appreciation. Tough decisions, you need somebody that can understand and that it really has an appreciation of what needs to be done and will go out and do it.
Thanks so much. As the Premier said, sleep in tomorrow morning. Back to you, Suhanna.
Can I do the same? Thank you,
can.
Steve. Here we are at Queen's Park, and as it gets darker, this building just looks more and more regal. But the Toronto Belt sitting around Queen's Park, way out in the 905. The ridings out there, we've got some numbers for you. Let's have a look at those. And keep an eye on that mini board as well throughout, because that stays up on your screen. So take us through these Toronto Belt ridings and who's leading and the totals. Robin?
Looks like the status quo here to me. In 1995, the Conservatives won all these ridings, and they're leading or elected again in all 14 of them. 14 of 16. We still have 2 outstanding, but it looks like it's a little bit more of the same. When we look in that leading elected board at the bottom, the Conservatives are at that 52 number now. That'll go back and forth, but the New Democrats are at leading or elected in 9, which is a little bit surprising because at this point their total vote percentage is only about 14.5%.
Mississauga Centre, Rob Sampson, the privatization minister, this would put that other, you mentioned there were 2 ridings still outstanding in there, also perhaps Blue because he is leading at this point, and Brampton West, Mississauga, Tony Clement joined the Conservative Party when he was 14, one of the people who helped to write the Common Sense Revolution in the lead. He also co-chaired, what was it, the United
Alternative Conference.
United Right Conference at the beginning of this year, so that one considered to be a very safe seat for the Conservatives.
When we talk a little bit about the New Democrat support again, they're only at about 14.5% in total vote. You would consider at that level they would be leading and elected in fewer seats. So
John O'Toole, by the way, has been elected over here in Durham, so there's another Conservative seat, and we'll see, I suppose, that number along the bottom change throughout the evening. 52 is the magic number. Now, people at home might be asking, well, why did that drop? Because it's leading and elected, so it's not just an elected board. It's as the votes are counted, those numbers will change depending on who is leading in certain ridings.
And Suhana, there's still 14 seats we haven't heard anything from at all, no results at all. We're still waiting on those. This again is that vote change board we talked to you about. That's important because we look at how much percentage of vote each party has at this particular moment. The Conservatives won the last election with a majority at 43%. A small change there. That's right, I'm sorry, 45%, is at 43 now. The Liberals are up about 8.9 percentage points. The New Democrats down 7 percentage points. That tells me they're leaking a lot of the support from the New Democrats to the Liberals.
And the last time the Liberals were over 40% was in David Peterson's era in 1987 when they won the majority. I believe it was with 47% of the vote. Over to the East Wing, and let's see what's happening with Jennifer Gates. Jennifer?
Well, there's a lot happening in this wing, and particularly at Jane Armstrong's seat, where we are talking numbers that look very familiar to Environics.
You're right, they do look familiar. A week ago we were in the field and we talked to 1,000 Ontarians, and a week ago we found that 42% said they'd vote Conservative and 41% said that they would vote Liberal. This is the popular vote that I'm seeing on the screen right now, so I feel good.
And what can you tell us about how the trend will develop tonight? Should we be looking for something specific here? Is this indicative of what's going to happen throughout the evening?
Well, if you can give me some comfort that these numbers are coming in randomly and that they are representative of the population, I mean, from the districts represented in terms of population, then I think we'll see this continue. I think that this will be a trend that we can count on.
Thank you very much, Jane. Suhana?
Thank you, Jennifer. We've got more reaction for you, Labour reaction. We can go to the Red Dog Inn with Percy Hatfield up north in Fort Francis.
Thank you, Suhana. I'm joined now by Wayne Samuelson, the president of the Ontario Federation of Labour. Can you work with another Tory majority government? What are the relations going to be between Labour and the government?
Well, I think it's safe to say it's pretty early to tell. But I can say this, based on the last 4 years, unless Mike Harris has some kind of a change of heart, I certainly don't predict that things will go well. I mean, the reality is that there have been legislative changes without any consultation, and the Premier has gone so far as to attack union activists and union leaders across this province. So I'm not optimistic, but we'll certainly see what happens.
Are we going to dust off those days of action?
We may well. I mean, we don't go around organizing days of action because we're looking for things to do. We do them because we have a government that ignores us, that doesn't listen to the concerns of working people and communities. And if this Premier continues in that way, then I think you'll see people on the street just as you've seen almost every day for the last 4 years.
Some testy days ahead. Thank you, Wayne. So Hannah, back to you.
Thank you, Percy. Well, we know who the Premier is going to be. What do you want to know next? Probably who is your candidate who will represent your neighborhood here at Queen's Park. And what we'll do is, throughout the evening, give you a piece of the screen with regional results so you can find out how your neighborhood voted and how your vote counted in that decision of who will come to Queen's Park to represent you. But please stay with our program because the main program will continue. You can watch the results on the side of the program to look for your particular riding. Let's go to some analysis with Peter Van Dusen and our panel. They are certainly not wallflowers. Talk away.
Well, and I think they've got lots to say now, Suhana, as we start to see the results firm up and we can see that we have a progressive Conservative majority for another 4 to 5 years in the province of Ontario. And I want to ask, Charlie, we started off with you last time, and I want to start with David Peterson and Ruth Greer and ask you, what was it about the message from both Howard Hampton and Dalton McGuinty that didn't seem to be enough to knock Mike Harris out of that job?
I think it was, my own read would be that Harris has been a very consistent politician. You can like him or dislike him, but you essentially get what you promised. And he did it in 1990. He didn't win that election. He did win in 95. And by and large, he was very credible, going to the people and saying, look, here's what I promised, here's what I did. And at least most people believe that to be the case, and I think most people believe that Michael will carry on and do again what he's done in the past. I think people do like this in an age, no disrespect to the NDP, who did not do what they said they could do, and it created a serious problem.
Well, okay, Ruth, David Peterson's given Mike Harris a ringing endorsement.
No, I'm just describing. You ask why he's resonating, and he's a very dominant personality, and this issue was either for Mike Harris or against Mike Harris, and it wasn't about, nobody ran around saying, you know, the other leaders were their men. It was either you like Michael, you dislike him, and he became the issue. And obviously,
well, as he set the stage, Ruth, as he set the stage for how many more years of Conservative rule in Ontario?
No, I certainly wouldn't want to project that, but I think what David has said is illustrated, in fact, the fact that the mood of the province is much more Conservative than it was 10 years ago, and that essentially the direction that Dalton McGuinty and the Liberals were going in was not that different from Mike Harris's, the balanced budget legislation, all of that they supported, and people said, well, we'll vote for Mike Harris. We'll vote for Harris 1 instead of Harris 2.
Then, Ruth, what does it say about the agenda of the New Democrats
I think it says,
in this climate?
I think we got really very squeezed in this election. I mean, we came in opposing Mike Harris. We made the opposition to Mike Harris, and people believed that they disagreed with us. They thought they liked him.
I'm told Dalton McGuinty, by the way, has been re-elected.
You know, my take on this is that, you know, Dalton McGuinty talked about topics, but he didn't talk about how he was going to do it. And people want more than just topics. I think in terms of the NDP, they had a message, they stuck to it. I think they campaigned very well. Their problem was nobody was listening, and that was pretty much from the outset.
Okay, let's go find out some more from the results desk here, Suhana.
Thank you, Peter. Let's go to some more results for you. Keep watching, though, on the portion of your screen for your regional results. Ottawa South, this is what the last leader we were looking for to see if he would be elected in his riding, and Dalton McGuinty has been. He will come back here and sit on the opposition side of the House.
You've been watching live coverage of the results of the Ontario election. As you've seen and heard, Ontario Premier Mike Harris and his Conservative Party will return with a majority government. Tomorrow morning, Premier Harris will hold a news conference in North Bay, and we'll have live coverage of that at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Right now, stay tuned to CBC News World. The National with Peter Mansbridge is next, and at 11 o'clock tonight, join Abby Lewis for a special Ontario election edition of Counterspin. Thanks for watching. Good night.
On June 4th, what are you up to? Therapy. Enter the mind of a killer. Academy Award winner Anthony Hopkins. Academy Award winner Cuba Gooding Jr. Instinct starts June 4th.
A tisket, a tasket, a green and yellow basket. I brought a basket for my mom, and on the way I dropped it.
We all know the problems of ordinary hooks, but Command adhesive hooks from 3M hold on strong until you simply stretch the tab. Command adhesive comes off clean. Real strength without the mess? What a welcome idea. Take Command. Holds on strong, releases on command. One more example of 3M innovation.
Because they're global. Because they're experts. Working around the clock. And they're doing it for me. Fidelity Investments, where 15 million investors put their trust.
The most important thing about investing is to know your investment personality, to understand clearly what your comfort zone is with respect to risk, And once you know that, the next most important thing to know is what is your time frame? Depending upon our goals and time frames, that will dictate what asset allocation and what mix of investments we should have.
Fidelity Investments, where 15 million investors put their trust. It's about a vision for moving earth, goods, even children better, more safely. Backed by people driven to exceed your expectations. Come ride with a leader that's taking a new road. International. Delivering beyond the expected.
I'm a CEO, and sometimes my IT guys are smarter than me. They say each of our 16,000 employees has a different computer need. So we didn't need a vendor to drop boxes and walk away. We needed a relationship. Then Dell came to see us. From having our servers installed to on-site support, it's like Dell's on staff. They're not building computers. They're building relationships.
Be direct. Dell. Dell servers use Intel Pentium 3 processors.
CBC Morning, weekdays at 6:30 Eastern on CBC News World.
Hi, I'm Derek Gulledge in Regina. You're watching CBC News World, Canada's news network.
From CBC News.
On day 72 of the war, a peace deal in the Balkans. The reaction in Belgrade, in the refugee camps, and here at home.
If we have an agreement, that means that the bombing will be terminated.
Will the deal hold? Ontario votes. Mike Harris is back with another majority. And Tiananmen today. 10 years after this, how has China changed?
And on the magazine, the deal. Slobodan Milosevic says yes to a peace plan.
The Serbian parliament today declared the peace.
The catch? Serb forces must get out of Kosovo.
There's a lot of pretty important tests that will have to be met in the next 36, 48 hours.
Reaction and the reality.
With Hannah Gartner and Peter Mansbridge.
Good evening. After 72 days of devastating NATO attacks, something very different is rumbling across Yugoslavia tonight. Hope for a real peace. Today, President Slobodan Milosevic accepted the latest international offer, a last-chance proposal hand-delivered to Belgrade by Russian and European envoys, and one that looks a lot like what NATO has demanded all along. Here are some of the main terms. An end to the violence and repression in Kosovo, the withdrawal of all Yugoslav military, police, and paramilitary forces, an international security presence with NATO at its core, the safe return of refugees, and substantial autonomy for Kosovo within Yugoslavia. The CBC's Elizabeth Palmer is following all the developments in Belgrade. She leads our coverage tonight.
Slobodan Milosevic didn't look like a man surrendering, but effectively he was, by agreeing to the terms of peace brought to Belgrade by Viktor Chernomyrdin and Finnish President Martti Ahtisaari. The Serbian parliament debated the deal behind closed doors, and when the deputies emerged only an hour later, the result was decisive.
Serbian Assembly accepted the imposed agreement by NATO and European Union. In total, no excuses, no exceptions. So war is over.
Vuk Draskovic, the former deputy prime minister who was expelled from the government for his conciliatory stand on the Kosovo conflict, fell into line, as did his party, and the proposal passed with an easy majority. But the vote was far from unanimous. The main opposition leader, Vojislav Šešelj, was furious. His party was the only one to vote against the accord. But even some of those who voted for it were disgusted.
Yes, capitulation. Sorry? Yes, capitulation.
By the time the news made Serbian state television, any sense of capitulation had been turned into victory. This agreement guarantees the territorial sovereignty of Yugoslavia, she says. The part of the deal that allows for NATO peacekeeping troops was never mentioned, and neither was the withdrawal of Yugoslavian and Serb forces. Just the fact that the United Nations would oversee Kosovo's peace. This deal differs little from what was offered before the bombing began 2.5 months ago. An infrastructure in ruins, an unknown number of civilians dead, and NATO estimates of 5,000 soldiers killed. Many people believe all this could have been avoided. I'm not sure whether people will be angry right away, she says, but perhaps after some time, if it turns out we could have settled this 3 months ago.
Yes, and we hate our government because of that. Our government is better.
I agree with them. The majority of our youth are not for the president. He shouldn't have signed this accord. I'm sad and I'm angry. I think he wasn't tough enough, but he didn't have to go into this war in the first place, and now he's given too much away. No matter how Slobodan Milosevic tries to dress it up, many people here will see this accord as a massive humiliation for the government and for the army. The question is whether their anger will now be directed against the president who so many months ago led them into this catastrophic war. Elizabeth Palmer, CBC News, Belgrade.
NATO wants to see much more than just words from the Yugoslav government. It wants action, proof that Belgrade is living up to the deal. The alliance says the airstrikes will continue until that happens. And tonight there's word of more attacks on military sites. With more on NATO's reaction, here's David Holton.
If the peace agreement sticks, these NATO troops in Macedonia will be in the vanguard of a peacekeeping force that includes Canadians, ready in a matter of days to move into Kosovo. Already they're preparing to secure the ravaged province, testing the equipment needed to function in a wasted countryside. But they're not there yet. Martti Ahtisaari, the Finnish president who helped to win Milosevic's acceptance of the peace deal, got a hero's welcome when he arrived in Germany to brief European leaders. But he was the first to say there's no proof yet that Milosevic will keep his word.
That the proof of the pudding is in eating it. And the same goes for peace processes.
Based on our past experience, in NATO capitals, the same caution prevailed.
First, we must have clarity that the Serbian leadership has fully accepted these conditions and intends to fully implement them.
This is not a time for popping champagne corks. This is a time for getting the refugees home and for getting the Serb forces out of Kosovo.
And British Prime Minister Tony Blair warned Milosevic not to backslide from the agreement.
Those terms aren't negotiable. They're there, they're set out, they're in full. And they have all to be accepted, and then they have to be backed up by action.
And by action, NATO means the beginning of a rapid withdrawal of Serb forces from Kosovo. Until then, the bombing continues. NATO jets flew almost 800 missions today.
This is a Pesh Army barracks.
Mostly, it says, in a relentless pursuit of Serb forces on the ground in Kosovo.
And until there's an agreement and the military is told to stop bombing, that's exactly what the military will do.
NATO may have more than the Serbs to worry about. These Kosovo Liberation Army soldiers will have to be disarmed under the peace agreement. Late today, the KLA said it would cooperate with the plan, but it's far from clear it'll surrender its weapons.
This evening, the Pentagon confirmed that a NATO military delegation will soon fly to Belgrade. It'll try to work out a timetable for the withdrawal of Serb forces from Kosovo in what could be the first real test of a peace agreement that for the moment exists on paper only. David Holton, CBC News, Washington.
Prime Minister Krajcin welcomed Yugoslavia's acceptance of the terms for peace. As Sasha Petrosik reports, the Canadian government is eager for the bombing to be replaced with peacekeeping.
In Ottawa, there is optimism.
For the first time in more than 2 months, there's a palpable sense of relief as Canadian leaders look forward to a more familiar role.
I'm very happy that again Canadians will be involved in peacekeeping.
Jean Chrétien even promised to send more troops beyond the 800 already on their way to Macedonia, though Canada can't say exactly how many more. Unlike Washington or London, Ottawa's emphasis is on an early stop to the bombing. Many MPs, including Canada's foreign minister, are uncomfortable that the war continues while peace seems near. Chrétien himself talks of waiting only for an agreement, not for an actual Yugoslav withdrawal from Kosovo.
And if we have an agreement, that means that the bombing will be terminated. But we have to make sure that we have an agreement before stopping the policies.
The whole question of the reconstruction was looked at.
Cabinet ministers talk enthusiastically of helping rebuild the region.
Civil administration, police, judicial systems in Kosovo.
In fact, the toughest note today was struck by a foreign affairs official
C'est vraiment une possibilité.
who said once the international peacekeeping force arrives, it may yet try to arrest Slobodan Milosevic. Still, away from Ottawa, the prospect of peace hasn't changed the tone much. For weeks, some Canadian Serbs have gathered in front of the U.S. consulate in Toronto. They were there again tonight, still angry at the media and frustrated.
Sanctions attacking one small country is not the best part of the NATO alliance position.
Among Kosovo refugees who are just beginning to settle down in Canada, peace also seems a long shot.
We don't believe Milosevic.
Some think they are closer to going home, others don't.
But I think it's needing a time to make a good circumstance for everyone, because it's a lot of destroying places, destroying villages.
Sami Ademi has already decided he prefers it here. He's applying for landed immigrant status. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Ottawa.
For the hundreds of thousands of refugees still in the Balkans, disbelief is mixing with the despair tonight. They say they've heard all this talk of peace before, and as Céline Galipeau reports, they're not making plans to go home just yet.
For weeks they have been waiting, hoping for any sign of a solution that would allow them to return to their homeland. But even as the news about negotiations was broadcast today, these refugees greeted it with skepticism, even outright disbelief. Even a little child wouldn't believe Slobodan Milosevic anymore, this man says. He lied to us too many times. During the Rambouillet talks, he was killing innocent Albanians, he says, attacking us with bombs. How do you expect us to trust him? After everything they've been through at the hands of the Serbs, many here feel Yugoslavian troops must withdraw altogether from Kosovo. They're not even sure they can trust the United Nations. For them, NATO forces alone can guarantee their safety. Only with NATO troops can we go back, he says. We'll be right behind them. Otherwise, we would be too frightened to go. The Serbs are all armed there. Even as negotiations were going on, new waves of refugees continued to arrive. These men say they walked 7 days through the mountains with no food, desperate to escape Serbian terror. Zeti Rashidi is a teacher from Pristina. He reached Macedonia this morning to try to find his family forced out of Kosovo a month ago. It's important for the West to try to talk to Milosevic, he says, but we should remember that all the deals he's made so far have been broken. They're just tricks. Weary of waiting, many here still have some shred of hope they can rebuild their lives, but not based on promises alone. We know Milosevic policies all too well, this man says. He's pledged to pull out his troops before, but he never follows through. When we see NATO troops on the ground with our own eyes, we'll go back. Once again, the future of these Kosovar refugees is beyond their control. No one expects them to return to Kosovo anytime soon, and even then, what kind of homeland they return to is uncertain. Céline Galipeau, CBC News, Stankovic, Macedonia.
Still ahead in tonight's news. Back-to-back majorities for Mike Harris. And Canada and the U.S. hammer out a new salmon treaty.
And later, on the magazine, he wrote to power on a wave of tax cuts and tight spending. Now, Ontario voters tell Mike Harris what they think of his common sense revolution. It's Judgment Day.
50,000 people are signing up for cell phone service today. You know what else? 148 million people are hooked up to the net. 7 billion emails are being sent. What's it all mean? There's a communications revolution going on, and one company is right in the middle of it all. Lucent Technologies. We make the things that make communications work.
The word is about, there's something evolving. Whatever may come, the world keeps revolving. They say the next big thing is here, that the revolution's near. But to me it seems quite clear that it's all just a little bit of history repeating.
He has been called the defining voice in American film. This summer, master storyteller John Sayles takes us on a journey into unknown territory.
You don't think we're gonna get rescued, do you? Papa calls it limbo because it sure isn't heaven and it's too cold to be hell.
You can't always save people. Limbo, chosen as an official selection at the Cannes Film Festival. Opens Friday in select cities.
Tonight, Francis Fukuyama calls it the Great Disruption, a breakdown in family and community values, but he thinks we are creating a new social order.
Pamela Wallen, tonight at 10 Eastern. Flashback, a website unlike any other, part of Newsworld's 10th anniversary. Choose a year and you'll get multimedia highlights of the major stories. Connect to us through Newsworld's homepage. CBC Newsworld over the past decade. Stay with us. There's more.
Well, people in Ontario have opted for another 4 years of Mike Harris and the Conservatives. After a raucous campaign and a chaotic election day, voters handed Harris his second majority in a row. Raj Ahluwalia joins us tonight with the details. Raj?
Peter, as you said, Mike Harris's Conservatives have won a comfortable majority. Let's look at the standings as of now. The Conservatives are leading and elected in 53 ridings, the Liberals in 34, the NDP in 9. But Peter, in terms of the popular vote, it's much closer. The Tories have about 44% of the votes cast, the Liberals 41, and the NDP 13. Now, not all the returns are in yet because there were problems in 9 ridings, prompting the Chief Electoral Officer to call it the worst voting day in Ontario history. It's also been, according to some, the nastiest campaign in Ontario history.
Wherever Mike Harris went, they followed. People angry at cuts to welfare rates, education, hospitals, and government services. The demonstrators wanted to derail the Tories, but all they got was jokes from Harris.
You know what I say to them? I said, don't worry, we're going to cut your taxes too.
While a 20% cut in income tax rates was the key promise, the Tory television ads were particularly effective. They portrayed their main opponent, Liberal Dalton McGuinty, as weak.
He's just not up to the job.
That image was reinforced during the leaders' debate 2 weeks ago, a pivotal moment in the campaign.
The big spending promises of Dalton McGuinty threaten your jobs.
While the Liberal leader stumbled, New Democrat Howard Hampton shone in the debate.
What I've heard here is Mike Harris 1 and Mike Harris 2.
The NDP picked up some support after the debate, but it didn't hold. As the campaign ended, it was clearly a race between the Liberals and the Tories. Today, people across Ontario voted in 103 ridings, 27 fewer than last time, thereby keeping a Conservative promise to shrink the size of government.
Now, Peter, for Mike Harris, it is a bit of a historic victory. He's the first premier to win back-to-back majorities in more than 30 years, since John Robarts in 1967.
Well, Raj, let's talk about what back-to-back means. There's no doubt in the first government of Mike Harris, it was a raucous time in this province. Lots of demonstrations against the Harris government. Lots of controversial issues placed forward on the agenda. What about the next 4 or 5 years for Mike Harris? What's it likely to bring?
Well, it promises to be much calmer Ontario over the next 4 or 5 years, Peter, simply because a lot of the radical changes he wanted to implement have already been announced. It's just a matter of them working their way through government. And the other thing to keep in mind, Peter, is that the opposition is likely to be not as strong as the previous opposition. For example, the NDP is sitting at a position right now where they may not even win the required 12 seats to become an official party, so that will make the opposition a lot weaker than it is now.
Raj Ahluwalia joining us tonight from Queen's Park, the Ontario Legislature. Well, there's peace in the Pacific Northwest tonight. Canada and the United States have signed a treaty ending their war over salmon. And as Terry Malevsky reports, it's a truce that will put new emphasis on conservation.
After 7 years of fighting over salmon, Canada and the U.S. have finally agreed to change the rules of a game which both are losing. Instead of quarreling over how to split the catch, they're trying to ensure that there's going to be one.
Instead of fighting over a shrinking pie, we are now working together to conserve stocks and thus increase fishing opportunities for us all.
Officially, it's a win for Canada because the U.S. foots the bill and catches fewer Canadian fish. The U.S. will set up 2 endowment funds worth a total of $209 million, if the Congress agrees. The income from those funds would be spent on salmon habitat and science in both countries. The agreement runs for 10 years everywhere except the Fraser River, where it's 12 years and where the U.S. is to cut back its share of the lucrative Sockeye Run.
Today we have achieved that critical principle. Conservation first, catching fish second.
A victory of diplomacy over conflict and a victory of regionalism over parochialism.
It may have been the principles involved, although the prospect of all that U.S. federal cash might have helped to bring the U.S. governors around. Even so, the cash won't change the prospects for the industry overnight. Indeed, Minister Anderson says it's going to be another very poor year, and the benefits of this deal seem way too far off for his critics, who condemned Anderson in the harshest terms.
I used to think he had a tattoo on his butt. Now I know it's the American flag right between his eyes. He sold us out, and he should be ashamed and he should resign.
On the outside in all of this was British Columbia Premier Glenn Clark, who, unlike the U.S. governors, has no jurisdiction over the fishery and was not at the table.
We become a big fish farm in British Columbia for the Americans to harvest. And I think it's a deeply disappointing day for anybody that cares.
For David Anderson, though, this is a victory for conservation.
Gentlemen, all in all, we have an effective and fair agreement. That puts fish first.
But it's still not a done deal. The Clinton administration now has to get the Congress to come up with the money. Terry Malevsky, CBC News, Vancouver.
Another episode today in the saga of Eaton's. 5 more stores are closing, and as many as 500 workers are expected to lose their jobs. As expected, stores in smaller malls were targeted. At the Penn Centre in St. Catharines and the Galleria in London, the Eaton's in Sudbury is also closing. Brandon is losing its store, and the store at Edmonton's Londonderry Mall is closing. The shakeup is part of a restructuring plan, possibly to make the chain more attractive to a buyer. And the CIBC is doing some serious restructuring. It says it is cutting costs by about $500 million. The bank says profits are down and it wants to boost its share price. Job cuts are expected. The CIBC did make $300 million in the last quarter. Next in tonight's news. Tiananmen Square, 10 years after the massacre.
Closed captioning for this program brought to you by the Globe and Mail. More foreign bureaus than any other newspaper in Canada. The Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper.
Nature is more civilized with the new Nissan Pathfinder. What will it take to build this company?
To get ready for prime time on the web.
How can we do everything a little faster? Okay, a lot faster.
When they're looking for answers, more CIOs, more MIS managers, more people look to Compaq than to any other computer company in the world.
Limits? What limits?
Compaq. Better answers.
Hello, I'm Robert Lack. A little bad news for the unemployed in the United States was a little good news for stock markets today. A report that new claims for unemployment benefits grew for the second week in a row cheered investors. They don't normally pay much attention to such a report, except that these days they're looking for any sign that the U.S. economy may not be as overheated as feared. The hope is the Federal Reserve will then not feel compelled to raise interest rates. The economic news helped markets, including the Toronto Stock Exchange. The TSE 300 index rose 36 points. The biggest boost came from the oil and gas, gold, and forestry sectors. The reaction to the economic report on U.S. markets was mixed. Investors snapped up blue chip stocks on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The Dow finished the day 85 points higher. But technology stocks moved the other way, and the NASDAQ exchange closed 29 points lower. Meanwhile, on currency markets, the Canadian dollar closed at 67.72 cents U.S. That's up 15/100ths from yesterday's close. The dollar's facing a big day tomorrow when full unemployment reports are released in both Canada and the U.S. And that's a business update from NBN. I'm Robert Lack.
This business report is brought to you by Compaq. More answers, better answers.
Well, no one knows just how many people died. Some say hundreds, some say thousands. The victims left behind by the tanks and soldiers which moved on Tiananmen Square and the pro-democracy protesters in Beijing. This is the 10th anniversary. But as the CBC's Raymond St-Pierre reports, the Chinese government has made sure there is no sign of public protest or mourning.
These are the chilling images that stunned the world 10 years ago. Tanks rumbling toward Tiananmen Square, crushing everything in their path, firing on unarmed civilians. Since then, Chinese authorities have worked hard to erase the memory of what happened here. They have stepped up efforts to stop any commemoration of the crackdown. Tiananmen Square has been cordoned off for several months for repairs. The square is surrounded by a solid curtain of steel. Security guards and plainclothes policemen patrol the area. Authorities have pulled the plug on foreign television networks at major hotels and apartment buildings in Beijing. At a Chinese foreign ministry briefing, Zhu Bangzhao explained why. Actually, some Western media are trained to use this 10th anniversary, the June 4th incident, to carry out anti-China propaganda, he says. This is something I have seen. This has aroused the dissatisfaction of some people, some departments. Police have kept a close watch on pro-democracy sympathizers. This is as close as our camera could get to the home of a top-ranking official who sided with students 10 years ago. In the last month, 100 dissidents have also been detained. Most leaders of the Tiananmen protest have fled or were exiled. Wang Dan is one of them. He's still fighting for more democracy in China, but admits the struggle is harder than ever. To tell you the truth, he says, I feel less effective outside my own country. I feel less efficient, and there's nothing I can do about it. Students from Beijing University spearheaded the Tiananmen protest 10 years ago, but today most students are unwilling to criticize the government. What happened 10 years ago was a disturbance, he says. Now students are only interested in studies and passing their exams. I think the students' intentions at the time were good, she says, but they were used by people who were against China, Chinese people and people from abroad. It's June 4th in China, and state-controlled newspapers don't even mention the massacre of 1989. The government is also ignoring families of the victims who've asked for an investigation into the massacre and have even launched a lawsuit against those responsible. Raymond St-Pierre, CBC News, Beijing.
Now, here's Hannah Gartner with our magazine.
Tonight, the Yugoslav government gives peace a chance. But is this the breakthrough NATO wants? We'll talk to Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs and this spokesperson for the Kosovo Liberation Army. Ontario votes. Canada's largest province goes to the polls and sends a message to Mike Harris. Hello. It's not over, not yet, but it could be the beginning of the end. Today, Slobodan Milosevic accepted an international peace plan for Kosovo. It calls for the withdrawal of Serb troops from the province, the return of all refugees, and the presence of an international peacekeeping force. NATO and the West have reacted with caution. And for now, the airstrikes will continue. Tonight, what are the problems ahead? Well, we begin with the magazine's Carol Off.
10 weeks of relentless bombing in Yugoslavia has finally produced results. President Slobodan Milosevic wants out of this war, and so does NATO. But what has been won in 2.5 months, and what's been lost?
Nobody won. The ethnic Albanians have had their housing destroyed, their lives destroyed. Serbia has lost in terms of its infrastructure and its own psyche. This is going to be a very bitter pill for Serbs to swallow, losing effective control of Kosovo. NATO has lost in terms of its relations with other countries and with the United Nations, and the UN has been a big loser as well. It was unable to play an effective role in preventing the war and unable to play an effective role in bringing the war to an end.
President Milosevic's stated objective in this conflict was to flush out the Kosovo Liberation Army. That force is now bigger and more powerful than ever. The KLA shared intelligence with NATO throughout the war, but the two never shared the same goals.
The KLA has been heavily armed during this conflict. Their stated aims are to have an independent Kosovo with probable reunification with Albania, and indeed have political aims to take over parts of Macedonia.
The ceasefire agreement calls for the KLA to be disarmed. That may be more difficult than NATO thinks, and it may be just as difficult to get Serbian paramilitary groups to stop fighting.
I think what you're going to find is a lot of very unhappy Serbs at having to relinquish effective control over Kosovo. Also, a lot of very unhappy ethnic Albanians who either won't be able to go home quickly or who feel that they should be independent after what they've suffered. And I think we may find a certain amount of guerrilla warfare or terrorism outside of Kosovo against targets that both sides consider to be their enemies.
The question will be, can the KLA be disarmed by NATO without further violence? And if they're not disarmed, then you can look for a small kind of Afghanistan in Kosovo, I'm afraid.
NATO's primary objective now is to return the refugees to their homes in Kosovo. Ideally, they'd go back before winter, but that may not happen. Any guerrilla war would make it very dangerous, and rebuilding will take years.
Most of their villages and most of their homes have been destroyed, so I think it's going to be a long time before conditions are satisfactory for their return, not only from the military point of view, but also from just an ability to go back and live there. It's going to be a long-term effort, I think, on the part of Western countries to get them back.
The biggest problem is going to be the housing stock and the infrastructure in Kosovo. So in conjunction with the security force that goes in to make the safe conditions for these people, we have to have a parallel humanitarian project where we start rebuilding. And unfortunately, the history of these kinds of operations indicates that the military side is usually very advanced, and we usually lag behind on the humanitarian. We saw that in Bosnia, and I hope we don't do that in Kosovo.
Of the people expelled during the Bosnian War, only 3% ever returned to their homes. 4 years after that conflict ended, Bosnia is still broken and divided.
The place closest, the Liberal candidate, they're pushing for the votes.
Less than 200 votes separating those two candidates. Al Palladini, a tough race, it appears.
Over to Thornhill, all of these candidates looking for a first term. Tina Molinari, Dan Ronan, and Nathan Rotman. And again, a very close race there for those two. Toronto Centre, Rosedale, well, look whose name I see there in the Independent. That would be John Sewell, but what a difference. George Smitherman, he ran Barbara Hall's election campaign. Of course, she ran for Mayor of Toronto. Mel Lastman beat her, but he is in the lead here in Toronto Centre, Rosedale, probably the most urban of all of the 103 ridings.
Still early in that riding, a lot of polls to come.
And in Ottawa Centre, we have Richard Patton coming back. At this point, no check mark, although it's hard to see sometimes on that red square, but he is in the lead. This is a close race.
This is very close. It's only about 200-300 votes separating the first two.
Here's David Peterson territory, London Fanshawe, but looks like Mr. Mazzilli, Frank Mazzilli, is ahead, but certainly very close.
There's still 6 ridings we haven't heard from, Suhanna. We'll be looking for that through the night.
We'll go back up north because Steve Irwin is live at the Mike Harris campaign. He's got some interesting guests for us. Steve?
Yes, Suhanna, indeed. Leslie Noble joins me now, another key architect of the common sense revolution and a key strategist right now in this election. First of all, the secret of why we are seeing such a success here for the Tories tonight.
Mike Harris, he kept faith with the voters from 1995 until 1999, and they've rewarded him tonight. They trust him to keep Ontario on the right track.
Leslie, let me ask you this. It's said that men vote for Mr. Harris far more than women, that they tend not to vote for the Tories. Why do you think that is? And as a woman, how did your plan address that?
Well, I'm not certain that that's accurate. Our party has had a gender gap for the last 30 years, every day except Election Day. And I think if you look in the last election, women voted just as much for Mike Harris as did men. Union voters, non-union voters, across every demographic. We'll have to see the turnout tonight to see whether that's held true, but I don't accept the premise.
Well, let's look at this. What is the key element that speaks to the voters of Ontario who have put this government back for a second term?
I think people are really looking for a government that will keep Ontario prosperous. We had 10 years of very mixed government, bad economic performance. Mike Harris has turned that around. He's lowered taxes, he's reduced government spending, he's brought Ontario back in what has been nothing less than a miracle.
I have 10 seconds left. I've been following the campaign right from the beginning, all the protesters at every stop. There obviously is a division. How will that be addressed?
How will the protesters be addressed?
How will the discontent of so many be addressed?
Majority governments are won all the time with less than a majority of the population. Not since 1908 has there been one otherwise. So I think Mike Harris will achieve the goals that he wants to achieve and be open to suggestions as to how to do that.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and congratulations. Back to you, Suhanna.
Thank you, Steve. Over to Peter Van Dusen now with some reaction from our panel. Peter?
Well, our panel is particularly intrigued as the evening continues, Suhanna, and our viewers at home, of course, with the total vote, popular vote, if you will, or total vote, and that with the Tories at 44.6, the Liberals at around 40, and the NDP down around 12, Ruth Greer. And I guess you'd have to, after hearing Francis Lankin talk about how the NDP will continue to champion those NDP causes, but do you have to ask yourself at this point, at that vote percentage, who they're speaking for?
Well, they're speaking for a lot of people in Ontario. 12% of the population is not an inconsiderable number of people. I wish it was more. But I think New Democrats, whether there have been few of them in the legislatures, there's only one member in New Brunswick, and she speaks to the same values and the same principles as we'll be fighting for here. And when parties rise and wane, I think in this legislature, the real opposition will end up being, in many cases, the New Democrat members. Our members are all experienced, they've all been there, they've carved out niches for themselves on healthcare, education, the environment, which hasn't been mentioned today, and I think there'll be a very strong opposition.
The collapse of the NDP vote, which is traditionally up over 20%, is really, in a lot of ways, the story tonight, David Peterson.
See, I think it is the big story, and how is this interpreted? I'm not sure. It could be in response to all the discussion about strategic voting. People disliked the Tories so much they went to the Liberals, who they thought had the best chance of beating the Tories. Or it could speak to some more serious structural problem with the NDP. In other words, the NDP are out of step. People don't trust the NDP for whatever reason. Because interesting enough, I mean, Howie Hampton was perceived to have done extremely well in debate. And he came up and he saved the party from near death, brought it up, but then it didn't translate Election Day. And I think my guess is as the analysts get to this, they will give that issue an awful lot of thought. So whether this is temporary or permanent.
I think what's incredible here is that the popular vote of Mike Harris and the Conservative Party is the same as the popular vote was when they won the last majority. I think that's incredible. I think it's also very, very interesting that they did that in spite of the collapse
But how kind is
of the NDP vote.
How kind is Mike Harris going to be to the New Democrats in the legislature?
That's something I think that people are going to have to discuss, and it's up to House leaders to deal with
the
that.
Tories want the Democrats to do
That's
it.
not the way to
Give
put
them
it. I mean,
advice.
the NDP members in the legislature will do their job, and they won't look to Mike Harris for kindness.
And
But
we
I
should
think
wait and
Charlie's
see what
right.
happens.
They
We should
did
wait
during
and
this
see what
campaign,
happens.
Ruth. They made
But
change.
It's been a polarization of the electorate, and the electorate have
But
chosen to
it's
go with
quite
the Liberals.
amazing. It's quite
Thank
amazing.
you all.
though.
We have to leave again for a moment,
Too
Charles.
bad. It was just getting good, Peter.
It's okay.
Can
We'll
we
be
get
back.
Sue Hannah to
We'll
show
be
us
back.
Willowdale?
Don't worry, we'll be back.
Can we get Sue Hannah to show us Willowdale?
Oh, look at this, Charlie Hornick here asking for favors to throw up Willowdale. And you know what, Charles? If that comes up, we will come over and tell you personally.
I just checked Willowdale. It's close. It's close, Charlie.
There you go. Personal information. Let's have a look at our standings in Ontario. First, for leading and elected. Can you take us through this, Robin?
When we look at their 97 of 103 ridings reporting, those ridings that aren't reporting are the ones in which we had some polling problems.
Yes.
And when we look across here, we see that the Conservatives are leading elected in 15, the Liberals are leading or elected in 31, and the NDP in 9. We've mentioned that NDP has to get to that 12 magic number to get official party status. But the Liberals are doing better than some of the polls had shown in terms of seats. The Conservatives have a decent majority if it stays at this point. Of course, we don't have all the ridings in, so that number could grow. It'll be interesting to see where those ridings we haven't heard from yet go to.
Let's have a look at these Conservative ridings, though, where it seems the Liberals have not really been increasing their vote. The Conservatives at 56 there of the 69 of 72 ridings that were Conservative before.
The Conservative numbers are down slightly. Do you think that they should be at 72 under redistribution if we spread the votes around the new boundaries?
But with the vote change, the Liberals, of course, gaining here at the expense of the Conservatives, not very much for them, and the New Democrats.
And we should point out we're looking at Conservative ridings specifically here, so we didn't expect much of a vote change in that blue column. But for the Liberals to pick up a lot of support there, it's because of the they're taking that as a direct transfer of votes from the New Democrats.
Let's find out if this is boring the spirits in Ottawa. Those Liberals, as you say, taking some support from the Conservatives, although not enough, of course, to form a government because the Conservatives have a majority. Chris Goldrick is standing by. Chris?
Here by Jim McLean, a senior Liberal strategist. And Jim, what do you take away from this? I know it's a disappointing night for you, but it looks like you increased your popular vote. Is that something to build on?
No, I think so. I mean, of course, it's disappointing in terms of the number of seats, but the popular vote is well up, and I think that's due to Dalton McGuinty's excellent campaigning in the last few days. If the election were another few days longer, I'm sure the seat results would be different too, but it's not, so I guess there's always next time.
Tell me about Dalton McGuinty. He had a difficult time, I think most people would acknowledge in the debate, but I think Liberals feel that after that he sort of found his groove. What about Dalton McGuinty's future in the party?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that he'll be around to lead the party into the next election and hopefully become premier after that one. He certainly earned it. He's performed above expectation, and the party is very excited about him and wanted him near the end to come to every riding he possibly could.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. Great. That's it from the Civic Center. A somber mood here, but I guess some reason for optimism in the future. Sue Hannah?
Thank you, Chris. And some of that reason for optimism, perhaps, are some of the new Liberals who will be walking in through these oak doors and finding their way around Queen's Park. And Brant Dave Levac will be one of those who will be coming here. This was a targeted riding. He will have his first term at Queen's Park. That's, of course, got to be very exciting for any candidate.
Mr. Levac's first term, but this has a Liberal tradition in this part of the province. This was Bob Nixon's riding. David Peterson will remember Bob Nixon as his treasurer. His daughter Jane Stewart is the federal MP for Brant.
And in Hastings, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington, Leona Dombrowski will also be entering Queen's Park as an MPP, a new MPP. In St. Paul's, Isabel Bassett, as we know, is gone. The culture minister defeated Michael Bryant, a new Liberal who will sit in the chamber with Dalton McGuinty as his leader.
We're still watching those numbers as leading and elected change at the bottom of the board, but it starts to firm up a little bit more at this time of the night as we elect more and more.
In Sarnia-Lambton, David Boucher has gone down to Caroline DeCoco, who will be a new Liberal here at the House. And in Ottawa-Vanier, Ms. Boyer comes back to, all three of these candidates actually were looking for a first term, and Claudette Boyer is the only one who got it. She will be coming here as a new Liberal. Peter Van Dusen, can you tell us about this riding, Ottawa-Vanier and Claudette Boyer?
This is the seat that was held by Bernard Grommet in the last legislature. She is a very powerful Francophone woman in the Ottawa-Carleton area. She's been on a number of different Francophone committees and is a very high-profile name. So you'd have to say that that is not much of a surprise that the Liberals would hang on to that seat in the east end of the city of Ottawa, Suhanna.
So victory for Claudette Boyer. What's happening at the Victory Cafe? Mike Wise is there. Mike, there you are.
Hello, Suhanna. Yes. We're here with two parents who are work with People for Education. It's of course, a parents group that was trying to push education issues this election. Of course, teachers were also pushing strategic voting. I'd just like to ask Kathy Dandy and Gay Young, what was your impression of what happened with strategic voting in this election?
I think there's a feeling that perhaps parent or education people felt that there should have been a collaborative effort more between the NDP and the Liberal Party, that they should have worked together as much as, say, a year ago to come up with develop the plan for ridings across Ontario, and so that people would know right away who they were supposed to be voting for, and there wouldn't be any confusion. There has been a lot of confusion in this election.
Gay Young, how do you assess how strategic voting did?
Well, I don't think it's done very well, and I think it did start out at a grassroots level, but then perhaps the Liberals took it over and said that, vote Liberal if you're voting strategic voting, and I think people got very confused and they didn't know in their own particular riding who was the particular person that was most likely to win, and we see that some of the ridings here in Toronto, for instance, have been split right down the middle between NDP and Liberal.
NDP is still looking for official party status right now. What do you think the effect of strategic voting has been on the NDP?
Well, I think that they were, in a way, fighting for their lives, and I guess that was part of what made it so difficult for the Liberals and the NDP to make this kind of decision about who would be the victor in each riding, and I don't know how they're going to fare out in the end, but I think that we need those three parties to offer some challenges to the way things are.
Are there lessons to be learned, perhaps, from this exercise in strategic voting?
I think so. I think that people have to continue to work together to form perhaps a better vision of where we want to go and have a cohesive plan, and not just allow it to come down to the last night and leave people up in the air. I think that there has to be an ongoing, like I said, an ongoing vision of where we're going to go with this, both in the NDP and the Liberal Party, if we're going to make any inroads in the Harris government.
Okay, Kathy Dandy, Gay Young from People for Education, thank you very much. Suhanna, back to you.
Thank you, Mike. What you're seeing right now is in North Bay. No word on whether Mike Harris will come out in the next couple of minutes, but at some point during the evening he will certainly say a few words to all of those who helped him with this victory tonight, because he is coming back for a second term, the only back-to-back majority since 1967 and John Robarts for a Conservative premier. Jennifer Gates is in the east wing of this building with reaction from the C.D. Howe Institute. Jennifer.
Thank you, Suhanna. Bill Robson is a senior policy analyst at the C.D. Howe Institute. Your reaction to the story we're seeing develop tonight?
Well, it seems clear that in the province of Ontario there was a fair amount of support for some of the directions the government was taking, but a lot of discomfort with the way that it was done, the speed and sometimes the clumsiness of the implementation. I think probably what tipped the scales was the economic performance. We've had tremendous job growth, unemployment's way down in the province, and at the end of the day that counts for a lot with people.
Was that driven by the blueprint, if you will, or the policies, or the surrounding economy and the situation outside of the blueprint?
I think that there was a little bit of luck and a little bit of good policy in that. I think the tax cuts certainly didn't hurt, and so now the lesson for the country as a whole is, and especially from Ottawa, is this a winning formula? Is this something that the federal Liberal Party would like to imitate?
Okay, we'll see. Can I also just ask you in general terms about the tax cut, how will we see that maybe trickle down across the country? Will we see any impact anywhere else?
Well, there are a lot of provinces now who are paying a lot of attention to their tax rates and how they compare across the country. Alberta and Ontario have a bit of a rivalry going. So when they see the political success you can have with this, I think it's going to light a bit of a fire under other provinces to get their rates down as well.
And yet the fire still probably will be burning as people try to make those changes, have some impact in areas like education and in healthcare, where people are saying we're tired of standing in an emergency room, we're tired of waiting for changes to happen in the classroom.
The little secret of this government is that they came to power promising to cut spending, but they never did. When the tax rates went down, revenue flooded in, and in fact they've been spending more. So that's a winning formula in any politician's eyes.
Thanks very much, Bill Robson. Back to the results desk.
Okay, Jennifer, you at home obviously want to know how your vote counted when you went over and marked your little X at the ballot box today. So let's have a look at some new ridings that we haven't seen before, and perhaps this is one that you live in. Tony Scarica elected in Wentworth, Burlington.
Tony Scarica was also one of those backbench conservatives who had a strong voice at times against some of the frontbench policies.
In fact, he criticized amalgamation of Toronto. He got in trouble for that. Whitby Ajax. This is Jim Flaherty. He will be coming back, Minister of Labour.
That's right, Jim Flaherty coming back.
I heard he has triplet boys.
He does.
Is that why he has gray hair? I have 3 kids too, and I know I've got gray hair. London West. I don't see a check mark here, so perhaps we don't have your vote hasn't been counted to give us an elect on this, but we will certainly be watching London West.
It's a pretty close race when we have about 50 polls left to go, and there are just a few votes splitting the Conservative and the Liberal candidate there.
Parkdale High Park. Now, this was an interesting one because Gerard Kennedy is the Liberal. A lot of people saw him as a dipper, as a new Democrat. Anna Marie Castrilli used to be a Liberal. She is now a Conservative. And Irene Atkinson, who was a Tory, is running as an NDP. Makes sense out of that one. But anyway, Gerard Kennedy is coming back to this House as a Liberal MPP.
Mr. Johnson is coming back as well from Perth, Middlesex. Bert Johnson was the Deputy Speaker for a time during this last government's term.
Former Mayor of Listowel is Bert Johnson. Did you know that? Well, he is. Anyway, he'll be coming here without his mayoralty chains.
Janet Ecker, Community and Social Services Minister, is coming back to Queen's Park from the Pickering-Ajax-Uxbridge region. She was running against a former MPP, Jim Wiseman, with the NDP. He's finishing third in that riding.
She was elected, of course, in 1995 for the first time. And over to Burlington and Cam Jackson,
who has bragging rights once again, it looks like.
5th term, he's got it. That's what he was looking for. Linda Glover, former chair of the Halton Board of Education. So that would have been health and education, but obviously Ms. Jackson
won by a big margin last time again, it looks like.
And here on Bruce, this is another new riding. This is the Bruce Nuclear Plant area. Helen Johns has been elected. She helped to develop the white paper on electricity restructuring. So if this is your riding, it's a new one for us on the CBC Evening News as we put up these results. She will be your MPP here at Queen's Park.
Helen Johns coming back to Queen's Park.
And Etobicoke Lakeshore. Morley Kells elected there. Cabinet material, perhaps? Perhaps, yes, perhaps, okay. Against Laurel Broughton and Victoria Obidkoff. Peter Van Dusen is with our guests on the panel. Let's go over there. Peter?
Thanks, Suhanna. Let's start with Charles Harnick, who is crowing as these results come in because he's seeing a lot of things that he wants to see tonight. But I want you to talk to me a little bit, Charles, about the impact of interest groups and the anti-Harris lobby during this campaign and how it seems to have fallen flat.
You know, I think the protesters, the union involvement, the interest group involvement has very much solidified the Tory vote. The Tory vote is the same as it was in the last majority government of Mike Harris. I think that all that happened was that the unions got involved, the special interests got involved, and it had the effect of solidifying Conservative vote. I don't think the tactic worked. And even if there's maybe a handful of ridings out of 103 that strategic voting worked in, what are we talking about? 1 or 2% of the makeup of the legislature? I don't think it worked.
Ruth?
Well, I think unions have always been involved in elections. I think Charles may be right that it certainly solidified those people who'd voted for Harris in '95 to continue to do so. But what it did do was it energized a lot of people who had not been involved in politics before, a lot of teachers who are traditionally not activists in politics, a lot of nurses, a lot of union members whose leadership may have supported a party became involved themselves. And what will be interesting is whether that activity continues into the future.
But given the result, does it tell them that despite that activity, they've come away with...
Well, but not all of that activity obviously was directed to the New Democrats. Mm-hmm. Some of it was obviously to the Liberals, and so they may well feel that they have had some impact in Mike Harris not increasing his majority, though they'll be very disappointed in the fact that he was returned.
Well, look, the Tories have won fair and square. They ran a good campaign. They deserve to be congratulated on it. But they didn't get all of the votes. And there's still a lot of people very angry about a lot of different things. And now, obviously, I think, as I said earlier, I think they'll try to foreclose on that, and they'll try to bring more people into the tent. I also think, though, to go back to the strategic aspects of this targeting, I think people got sort of fed up with it. It was when, and it's really my first experience with this kind of picketing was in 1990, and then it was novel and it got a lot of media attention. There was so much of it now that was just washed out. It wasn't interesting anymore.
It was over the wall, David.
Yeah, it was over the wall. It was excessive.
That's right.
And then the media started to say, look, we're not going to cover this every night. They cover the first few times and get tired of it. And so the media pass on. If it's not interesting to the media, it doesn't get the coverage. So I don't think it had the intended effects in this campaign, the same kind of effects it had perhaps in other campaigns.
But to these results that we've seen tonight, and I think a lot of people will be surprised by the closeness of the popular vote between the Liberals and the Tories tonight. Does Mike Harris take away from that at all, that stay the course, but give some perhaps a little bit of restraint or a little slowing the pace at all, Charles, or is it full steam ahead?
Oh, I think it'll be full steam ahead.
I think a lot of thought will go into the legislative agenda. I think that I agree with what David says. That I think that part of the job is to bring people together as best you can, and I think that that's a realistic way, I think, to proceed.
But again, I want to just leave this portion by asking this: are we going to see the same kinds of protests across the province, or if people said it didn't work, we'll lay off?
No, of course you are. If Mike Harris continues to cut education, continues to cut healthcare, continues to savage the environment, people are going to protest. Yeah, whether it has an impact on how the population votes is the question for tonight. But if people can't get attention from their government in any other way than being there with a picket sign, they'll be there.
Very quickly, Charles.
I think you have to recognize that the majority of votes went to the Tory party tonight, and I think that to maintain the same level of support for two majorities in a row says something, and it says where the mainstream of this province is. And I don't think that going over the wall.
I have to say that we have to go back.
We have to ask Hannah to tell us about Willowdale.
It still is a
She's
democracy.
leaving me in suspense here.
You guys can keep talking now, Charles and Ruth and David. Don't mind us over here. Despite all of our technology, folks, there are still some races that are not settled. Let's have a look at some of those right now. And David Peterson territory, London Fanshawe, Frank Mazzilli, and Irene Matheson and Mr. Peter Mancini, of course. That one, despite the fact there are 64 of those polls reporting, we can only tell you who's leading at this point.
Irene Matheson is a former MPP.
In London West, Bob Wood was elected there in 1995. And Daryl Skidmore, this was a targeted riding. He was endorsed.
It's a close race at this point. Talking about strategic voting, though, we know that the Conservatives have lost very little of their own support in those strategic voting targeted ridings.
So perhaps that'll tell us it's not working. Over to Thornhill, and
we also have a close race here with 100 of 180 polls reporting. We still can't, our decision desk still can't declare a winner at this point. We don't know where those voters
And all three of these candidates are looking for a first term at Queen's Park, so if somebody gets a real boost or a shot in the arm, I always get those expressions wrong. But anyway, one of those candidates will get to Queen's Park by the end of the night. Toronto Centre, Rosedale, George Smitherman, over Durhan Wong Riger, and one would have expected the third candidate would have been NDP, but in fact it's John Sewell, former mayor of Toronto, who the IND of course stands for independent.
I think he's the only independent we've seen on a board tonight doing quite well in that riding, splitting the vote presumably four ways, at least some of the votes.
And in Windsor, St. Clair, the big three automakers, of course, have plans here. Dwight Duncan over Lessard. These two have been in battles before, though. In 1995, Dwight Duncan has been elected. Didn't he run as well for the Liberal leadership?
He did, and this is the first time we're seeing those results from Windsor, St. Clair coming in late tonight. Dwight Duncan is coming back to Queen's Park.
one of the things that we've been talking about is the close vote between the Liberals and the Conservatives. That might cause some people to be very upset enough to leave. Let's find out. Jennifer Gates is in the East Wing. Jennifer?
Indeed, I am in the East Wing, talking to people who have come here to see how the election race will unfold for us. Some of the people are happy about it, others are not, and I'm sitting with one person who, by her own admission, has struggled the last couple of years under the Conservative government and is not impressed by what is happening tonight. Sheila McKenna joins me now. Sheila?
Hi. Yeah, I think this is a really sad night for Ontarians. I was saying it makes me wonder how people could watch what Mike Harris has done in these years and choose more of that. Do they not see the poor on our streets? Do they not see the chaos in our hospitals? Do they not see the conflict in our schools? Have they no compassion? Have they no concern for the environment?
Well, tell me about your own particular situation. You've raised a now adult daughter on your own and have been working to try and make ends meet. What are the next 5 years going to be like for you?
Well, I don't think I'm going to stay around in Ontario for more of this.
That you'll leave the province?
I believe so. We often hear about people going south for other opportunities, but I'm thinking of going back to Europe. That sort of society where it seems to me that there is a greater concern for the community and for the environment is where I want my daughter to start her life.
That's a pretty big step.
Yes, it is. I'm very surprised. I've been here for nearly 20 years and I really thought that I'd made my home here. But you have to feel that you can be a part of a society to settle in happily. And you know, the lack of concern for the future, for a decent future that isn't totally dominated by the almighty dollar, that's really not me.
Thank you very much, Sheila McKenna. Back to you, Suhanna, at the results desk.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Get it off my...
This is where our guests are tonight. In the East Wing, you can see it there of Queen's Park. We're looking north at it from University Avenue. It's quite an incredible building. One of the things, though, that we can say about this building is that it's got more than 100 years of history. We go into the next millennium, of course, with a Conservative majority government, so this building will take us with the Conservatives up in the chamber in a majority position through to the beginning of the next century anyway.
But there's still a lot of questions tonight, Suhanna. One of those things is how the NDP are going to do. We know they're leading or elected at the bottom of our leading and elected board in 9 of the ridings, but we don't know if they're going to have that official party status. One of the reasons they're only at number 9 is that they lost 2 seats. 2 MPPs won't be coming back. Wayne Lessard in that Windsor-St. Clair riding we showed you where Dwight Duncan won. 2 incumbents running against one another, and Wayne Lessard came out on the losing end of that one. In Timiskaming, where David Ramsey won, Len Wood was the NDP candidate, who was an NDP MPP in the last government, and he's not coming back either. Those were seats the NDP needed to hold on to, MPPs they wanted coming back. That's why they're having problem getting to that magic number 12.
Robin, 2 hours of counting tiny crosses on ballots, and here are the stories they tell. A Tory majority government, but the Liberals gain support in Toronto and Central Ontario at the expense of the NDP. From the Burlington Skyway to the foyer of Etobicoke's Old Mill Inn to the Pickering Town Centre, the 905, it stays blue. Confusion kept polls in 9 ridings from opening time this morning. The Liberals want an investigation. Percy Hatfield is standing by live at the Red Dog Inn. And Percy, some questions about the future of Howard Hampton. We know he's been elected, so has his wife, but what about leadership?
I've been asking those questions to Hannah, and everyone I talked to tonight said there is no question about his leadership. Everybody at the top of the NDP echelon, if you will, has said that he ran a good campaign, a great campaign. They had their message, they got it out, they didn't waver from that message. He's going to be coming in here in a minute from now approximately. But they said, you know, the economy was such that the Tories were going to get back in. They were satisfied with this campaign. Because he won an election here in his own riding, they say there is no question at all. The Toronto Star endorsed him. They mentioned that one. They say that he will be staying on as leader. What they have to fight about now is party status, and they do expect to fight with the government about that.
Thank you, Percy. We'll come back when Howard Hampton does
Yeah,
come up to speak.
He'll be here in a minute or so.
Okay. Some more results for you from ridings across this province. Of course, there are 103 of them. In Don Valley East, this is one that we've been waiting for. Look at this. Dave Johnson, Education Minister, running behind David Kaplan, the son of Eleanor Kaplan. This one was very close to call. It still is at this point.
And this could be a big upset for the Conservatives. Dave Johnson, of course, was the Education Minister, and he took the blame or the praise for a lot of the education reforms that we've seen. He's also known as the fixer. He was head of management board during the OPSU strike. He did so well there. They moved him on to education to oversee a lot of the reforms. And this is a close race, too early to call yet, but it could be an upset.
We will certainly be watching it, as will our panelists. Over to Peter Van Dusen with their thoughts. Peter?
Where are we? Thank you very much, Johanna. And let's look at that quickly, Charles Harnick. And we want to talk a little bit about Howard Hampton as well. But what's at stake here if Dave Johnson goes down to defeat in Don Valley East?
Well, you know, I think, the whole world ran against Dave Johnson. And I think quite simply, if you take a look at the NDP vote, there isn't any so far. There's a lot of polls yet to go. They haven't declared a winner. But I think if Dave Johnson wins this riding, he beats the whole world. If he doesn't, I don't think there's any shame, because the whole world ran against him.
Let's talk a bit about the situation for Howard Hampton as well, Ruth. You heard from his party headquarters and Percy Hadfield that clear support there for Howard Hampton to continue in the job. But I want to ask, how do you do that if you're the leader of a party that went from 21% support in the last election down to 12 and a bit?
Well, we lost support. We were in a tight squeeze. I don't think anyone is going to attribute that loss to Howard. In fact, there may well be those who say that the fact that we survived with almost party status was due to Howard's strong leadership. I think what's happened over the campaign, for many people, the NDP was seeing the face of Bob Rae. It's now the NDP and Howard Hampton. He has established himself as the leader of the party, and I think it'll be very unlikely there'd be any question about that leadership continuing.
But Ruth, I don't want to accuse you of being disingenuous here, but let's be honest about this. Then, if that's true, then let's give Dalton McGuinty credit for running a very fine campaign. His messages came through. He got a high percentage of the popular vote, much more than expected, almost as the same as the Tories.
Okay.
So
thanks. We have Howard Hampton. Let's go back to our desk.
You've got to take responsibility of the credit or the blame.
Thank you, Peter. What we're seeing now in Fort Francis is Howard Hampton coming into the Red Dog Inn, where he will make that speech I'm sure he has been dreading, because as you look at the mini board, 9 seats for the New Democrats leading and elected. However, Howard Hampton will be back at Queen's Park. He has been elected in Kenora Rainy River. His wife, Shelley Martel, has also been elected in her seat, so the husband and wife team will be back. But those questions will linger. Perhaps we will hear something tonight. I doubt it in this speech, but Percy Hatfield is there as Howard Hampton makes his way through his supporters in his riding, which is a very, very big riding, by the way. If you put New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia together, Kenora Rainy River is even bigger than that.
And Howard Hampton admitted in final days that he couldn't win, he couldn't be the next premier, but he also predicted that the NDP could win about 20 seats. He's got to be disappointed with this showing tonight. And
I think we could even call it disastrous for the NDP if they don't make 12 seats. So Howard Hampton about to speak. Let's listen in. This has obviously got to be a very tough moment for Howard Hampton. He seems to be collecting his thoughts, and wiping a tear is what that is there. So Howard Hampton is very emotional despite the fact that he has won his seat, and you can see the support around him. Let's listen to what he has to say.
I can't say thank you enough to all of you. We've been through these campaigns so many times in the past, and I see so many people here who have time and time again come out and work for me night and day, day in, day out, week in, week out, and I simply can't say thanks enough. You've done just a tremendous job again, and I'm very happy with my personal victory, and I'm happy. I'm obviously disappointed at the results across the province. I'm obviously very disappointed about that. And we'll have to do something about those results across the province. We'll just have to go back and do it again. I really want to thank all of you. I want to thank the thousands of people across this riding who supported me, who worked for me. I especially want to thank all of those Aboriginal people who live in the farthest north of this riding. People who supported me in overwhelming numbers tonight. And I can't say thank you enough. Miigwech! Miigwech, yes. As I said, this is bittersweet. I'm not happy about the results across the province. But in a democracy, the people decide. And tonight, the people have decided, and no matter how much I may philosophically disagree with the result, that is the result. And we simply have to rededicate ourselves to putting the shoulder to the wheel and working even harder next time to make sure that the province that we love so much moves in the direction that we want it to, that it becomes, once again, the kind of province where equality means something, where working families can look forward to a decent health care system, a good education system, and most of all, strong communities, which make us all strong. That's what we have to rededicate ourselves to, and I want you to know I'm in for that. I've always been in for that, and I'm in for it again. I obviously want to thank my family. You know, it doesn't hurt when you're related to half the phone book in this town. And I can honestly say that every member of my family was out there canvassing, putting up signs, doing all the work that you do in election campaigns, and they were doing it here, they were doing it everywhere, from one end of this riding to the other. And I can only say I have a wonderful family, and they seem to stand behind me no matter what. And I want to say thank you also to all of those wonderful people who ran as NDP candidates across the province. Wonderful people. I have called both Mike Harris and Dalton McGuinty, and Shelley and I extend our personal good wishes to them both. As I say, I don't always like the results of election campaigns. This was a very hard-fought campaign, but the people have decided, and we must congratulate those people who were involved in this battle, And I congratulate Mike Harris on his victory, and I congratulate Dalton McGuinty on a fine campaign. I wish the results had been different. They will be next time. I want to say something to all those people who put their trust in us, the Karen Fords, the Veronica Manuels, the Bernard Lorenzis, the George Cooks, people who have been hurt by the Harris agenda, who came forward to tell their story. And I want them to know that we will continue our struggle for them. We will not betray the trust that they placed in us, and we will go on and we will fight harder. Tonight we need to look ahead at how we can best serve all of those people who have put their trust in us all across the province, who are counting on us to speak out for them and to stand up for them. We began our campaign 28 days ago. The time has gone quickly, but we have all come very far together. I made our message very clear. I used the plainest language. For some people, maybe it was too plain. We have remained true to our principles, to the people who count on us. Personally, this campaign has been an incredible experience for me. I am filled with hope for our future together. We are privileged to live in a great province, and I promise you I will do all that I can over the next 3 or 4 years, however long it is, to make it an even better province and to achieve a better result next time. There are few places in the world that have Ontario's ability to create wonderful communities. Communities where people can work together and can care about each other. And we must never allow that to be sacrificed. I'm very proud of the campaign we run, of the team that has worked so hard, and I don't need to tell anyone here tonight. It's evident that NDP campaigns aren't fueled by money, they're fueled by people. Wonderful people like you. I cannot adequately express my gratitude to you and to all the people in other campaign rooms like this across the province. You're wonderful people, and you make this province a great place to live in. I'm especially proud that so many people told us during the campaign that the NDP speaks for me. You're on my side. You understand what me and my family and my community are going through. They told us that in Toronto, in Beaches Woodbine, Broadview Greenwood. They told us that in Hamilton. They told us that in Timmins James Bay. They told us that in Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury. And they told us that here in Kenora Rainy River. Just let me repeat, to all those folks who voted for NDP candidates and to everyone who worked so hard in our campaign, I pledge tonight, our fight is not over. I pledge to you, I will work harder than ever, here in Kenora Rainy River and everywhere across the province, harder than ever. To all of those working people, all of those wonderful people who go to work every day, who work so hard, all of those people who want to go to work each day and still don't have the opportunity. We're going to keep on working for you. We're going to keep on fighting your battles. We're going to keep on doing what we believe and what we know is right. And we will win. I know from my experience over so many years now that when you redouble your efforts, when you go back to the drawing board, when you dedicate yourself again, there are more wonderful people like you that we can reach out to, and we will win. So, I look forward to seeing all of you again back here in about 3.5 or 4 years, when not only will we win in Kenora Rainy River, but we will win everywhere else in the province too. can't let you keep that up. All right? I can't. We are a party, and now it's time to party, and I want to party with you. All right? Let's go. Okay?
We've all had to make these speeches before.
From the riding with the largest gold mines, certainly some golden, gracious words from New Democrat leader Howard Hampton, who says, of course, that it's bittersweet. Ruth Greer, I saw you watching this as Mr. Hampton was giving his speech. What was in your heart?
Oh, in my heart was a lot of emotion for Howard, who must be very tired and who is there making what is a very difficult speech to make, and without Shelley beside him. It's always on these occasions nice to have your partner there
She's, of course,
to support you, and she's in her own riding. He must be very disappointed, and the loss of Marion Boyd and Wayne Lessard and Len Wood will certainly be felt in the caucus, but I think he's I felt very proud of him, and I'm very fond of him, and I'm just delighted that he has the energy to think about the next election. I certainly can't think about it until maybe tomorrow or the next day, but that's Howard fighting and out there whenever the bell rings.
Mr. Peterson, can you relate?
It was a very classy speech. Yes, I can relate. You know, it's a difficult time to do it when all the adrenaline drains from the body. You're tired, you've lost, and I suspect this is probably the worst drubbing the NDP has had in recent memory that I'm aware of. But he was classy, he was positive, he came back, and my heart goes out to Howie Hampton. I think at the end of the day, people watching the show tonight and watching Ontario politics saying, look, tough campaign, but we have some pretty fine people involved in our political life from all different points of view. And this is the essence of democracy, it's the essence of debate. So, look, it's tough. He'll bleed, he'll lay down and bleed a little bit, he'll get back up again, as will they all. But I think all Ontarians can be proud tonight. The people have spoken with resolution.
Charles Harnick, what struck you about what Howard Hampton had to say?
I think Howard put a very brave face on obviously a very difficult evening. I think he was relieved that he obviously won his own seat. And I think it's one has to reflect that when a leader such as Howard Hampton campaigns well, which he did, does superbly in the debate, which he did, you have to reflect and I think feel his frustration that people didn't listen, and I think that for him was obviously very difficult, because I think it's a general consensus that he did very well as a campaigner and delivering a message and certainly in a pressure-packed debate.
Ruth, it's fair to say I think that you learn a lot about a political leader during a campaign. You learn a lot about him on a night when he loses too.
Yes.
And was Howard Hampton more gracious than you might have been?
No, than I might have been. Yeah. Oh, I suspect he was much more gracious than I would have been in the same situation. That's why I've never wanted to be leader. But let me make one point about what he said, because when he was talking about the number of New Democrats he'd met, there were some comments from my fellow panelists. A lot of New Democrats voted Liberal tonight. They felt so strongly about the need to get rid of Mike Harris that they crossed party lines, and a lot of people who perhaps sometimes vote Liberal, sometimes vote New Democrat, this time voted Liberal. And I'm with Howard. I think some of them will come back in the future.
But let me just say that, Ruth, that could be the start of a trend that the NDP becomes irrelevant. I'm just telling you, if in a highly polarized world. So we don't know how this is going to play out in the future, because look, he did a nice job tonight, and I think he deserves credit for it, but Charlie is right. This was a serious drubbing. It was the worst in recent memory. I don't remember at another time, somebody will dig it up in the history books, the last time the NDP or the CCF got 12% in this province.
30 years ago.
Well, a heck of a long time ago.
Let me ask you this. I mean, now that we've talked about the strategic voting and that people went to the Liberals, how do you think at this moment those who went to the Liberals, who had been traditional NDP voters and obviously got caught up in this strategic voting, how do you think they feel now when they look at the job that Howard did and didn't get rewarded for, and when you see the fact that it'll be a struggle to get to 12 seats?
Well, I think that how they feel will depend on whether they were in a riding where perhaps by voting Liberal they did defeat a Conservative, and we lost some cabinet ministers and some other members. But I think for some of them, There are people who had to make a very difficult choice, but who still support the values and the principles of the NDP. And unlike David, we're not going to go away. And we may be small at this point, but there are still a lot of people out there who believe in the things we stand for and will want to see that continue, and will certainly never see us as being part, a left wing of the Liberal Party. And I think over the next session, we will see the increasing similarity between the provincial Liberals, and they've changed over years too.
Everybody's
These Liberals are much more conservative than your Liberals were.
And your NDP
and that will become...
I saw your party change with power so much, there was no recognition of what went into power, what came out, Bruce. So it's hard when you speak, when socialists speak as if they've got some special integrity or some special philosophical consistency, because nobody's demonstrated that.
Oh, I think that's... I would disagree with that,
This
David.
debate will certainly continue as the night continues. We'll let you continue that. Let's go back to Suhan and get the latest on results.
Thank you, Peter. Obviously, Ruth Greer disappointed. There are others who are NDP campaign workers across this province who, of course, will be disappointed. Paul Riley is at Francis Lankin headquarters with a guest who has a couple of thoughts as well. Paul?
Thank you, Suhanna. We are here, one of the few places the NDP are celebrating tonight. I'm here with John Ellis, who played a significant role in bringing Francis Lankin to victory. John, how do you feel about the speech that Hampton just gave?
I'm really impressed with that speech, as I was with his whole campaign. I think that he fought against tremendous odds. He was clearly the best leader in this whole campaign, and we saw it in that speech. I think that he was preparing us for a bigger fight we have ahead, because clearly we didn't do as well as we'd hoped to, but it was in there.
Are you surprised, John, that so many people voted Conservative this time around?
Well, I must say I rather expected this outcome. Of course, I expected the NDP to do better, but you know, there was a sense that this was a campaign between the Liberals and the Tories, and the NDP was somehow not taken as seriously as it should have been. So I'm not exactly surprised. I'm disappointed, but not exactly surprised.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Thanks.
That's it from down here, Suhanna. Happy crowd, but somewhat subdued based on the overall impression they got tonight from the results for the NDP.
Thank you, Paul. This is where we are tonight, live broadcast, the first time ever from Queen's Park, and the big window that you can see right there in the middle, that's the press gallery. How come we get all the big windows? Well, the Premier's window, of course, is just on the east wing. He's got a pretty good view himself. Excuse me. Some more results for you. We'll go to London and find out what some of the numbers there are. London West, Bob Wood. Robin?
Bob Wood's returning to the legislature for the Conservatives in London West.
Not yet. We haven't heard that he has been elected yet, but certainly he is leading by 190 votes up on the Liberal candidate, Daryl Skidmore, the New Democrat candidate there, of course.
Late in the evening, I'm jumping ahead. If we look at the leading and elected board, again at the bottom, we have the Conservatives at 59 seats right now, the Liberals at 33 and the NDP at 9, but there are still a couple of ridings to come in.
You might wonder why when we put up Davenport, we've got 3 big zeros there. That's because this is one of the 9 ridings that was affected by late polls closing. We'll have those results for you as soon as they come in, and when they do, they will come pouring in. Here's another one of those ridings. Jim Wilson there, probably anxiously awaiting to find out what his votes are. That's why the zeros are in that one as well.
And those are the only 2 ridings, Suhanna, in which we have not had any results at all. Those are the 2 that we have those goose eggs down the columns. Every other riding in the province we've had at least some results in from.
Now, as we await those ridings, we know that Dalton McGuinty, of course, will also be making a speech. Let's look at this mini board, 59, 33, and 9 for the New Democrats. So when that speech comes along, of course, we will have it for you. And we are still waiting for Mike Harris, the Premier, because this is a Conservative majority government, to come to his headquarters in North Bay. The panel on my right has a few words of analysis, wise words of analysis, Peter.
Well, the wise words of analysis, they really don't stop. From the last session till this session, every chance we get to meet, it's just that from time to time our audience at home gets to hear them.
But there's some things that haven't come out of this. I mean, there will be a lot of new faces in the legislature. I keep wondering what the breakdown of between women, will there be more women members, or I don't have a sense of that. who you've elected.
I hope that Suhanna shows us what's happened
You desperately want to
in the city of Toronto, including Willowdale, where David Young, I understand,
got
has
50%
been
of the
declared
vote.
the winner.
You're
Charlie, he's
getting
got
more like
50%.
Bill Davis talking about
I am
Brampton all the
thrilled.
time. John,
Yes.
don't be so
Thrilled.
parochial. Now, there is a world beyond Willowdale. You know
There
that,
is a
John. Not much, maybe.
I
but there is
understand that. I
You do?
understand that, but I am.
We haven't
thrilled about
demonstrated that tonight.
Okay, but let's-
David Young has won.
But let's think about what if, in fact, there is the whole of the 905 belt has gone Conservative. Does that mean that there has been a loss of Conservative seats within Toronto? I think probably, with Kaplan gone, with Bassett gone,
No,
with Johnson gone and Bassett gone. So have we got a Liberal NDP City of Toronto
Al Leach,
surrounded by a blue belt
Leach,
and
by the
Al
way,
Leach
and Al
gone?
Leach's seat gone
No,
to
we
the
have the
Liberals.
three in Etobicoke.
Well,
Etobicoke has three Conservatives.
Etobicoke has 3 Conservatives. North York
Scarborough has a couple.
North York.
Well,
has
let's
2.
talk a little bit about-
Scarborough has 3. So I think that's the.
There's a mixture.
That's the breakdown.
So
right
if we look at changes in cabinet, for instance, in this government, we're talking about Dave Johnson, we're talking about
Noble Villeneuve.
Noble Villeneuve and Isabel Bassett, and I want to know from you, Charles, what you've seen out there. Typically, in the Mike Harris government and massive change, these are embattled positions. In some of the people you've seen tonight, who do you think they'll be looking at in terms of cabinet material?
I wouldn't want to speculate other than to say we have had a phenomenal number of very talented people in the caucus, and I know that there are no shortage of people who are capable of moving into those positions, and I think the Premier will have his work cut out for him in making some of those decisions, because they will be tough decisions given the number of people who are so talented. And I think as well, you've also had a great many of those people who have 4 years of government experience now under their belts. And I think there's a number of men and women in the caucus who would be very capable.
How big of a loss? Let's look at some of those cabinet ministers in particular. Let's start maybe with Noble Villeneuve. Let's look at how big of a loss is it to lose a minister of agriculture like him, who's a beef farmer and who's a francophone.
I'm a very strong francophone, so I'm a very fine human being. I sat in the house with him for 15, 20 years, and he was a...
And there aren't very many Conservatives in Eastern Ontario, because he represented that region as well.
I think that will be that's a big loss for the government, because, as David says, he's a very talented person. I think, and I'm from Willowdale, so I don't know much about farming, but I can tell you that Noble Villeneuve was considered, I think, by everybody in the legislature to be about the best friend that farmers could ever ask for in a government. And I think that'll be very difficult.
All right,
in the Southwest,
it's very disappointing.
On that note, Ruth, we'll have to pick up on that on our next go-around. Thank you very much. Let's go back to Suhanna.
Thank you, Peter. Well, 2.5 hours of ballot counting have made for an easy majority for the Tories. Leading and elected in 59 seats, Mike Harris wins back-to-back majorities to lead Ontario into the next century. Hasn't been done since '67. Howard Hampton keeps his seat, but disappointed, obviously, to have led the NDP into unofficial party status. And the Liberals make gains, remain strong in the cities, but still trail the Tories in the popular vote. One of the things, we have Howard Hampton from the Red Dog Inn, way up the north in his riding, and we heard his speech just a little while ago. One of the words he used was bittersweet. We'll have a chance to ask him just exactly how he feels about that. Mr. Hampton, you're with us. You said you were up for the fight. What do you mean by that?
I think we fought a good campaign. And I think it was a campaign that was moving people. We didn't get the result that we wanted or the result that we deserved. And I would have liked a better result for our party and a better result across the province. But that's the way it goes.
What would that have meant, though, for you personally as leader, a better result?
Our polling, our tracking polling was showing us at about 19 or 20%, even a day and a half ago. And we think that would have won for us about 21 or 22 seats. And that probably would have meant a minority government. and a minority government would have, I think, dramatically changed the face of Ontario.
Obviously, we know that's not the case. A Conservative majority is the government that's going to be in power. Does this mean, Mr. Hampton, that the voters really rejected your message?
I don't think so. Again, even the public polling as late as 2 days ago showed that we were continuing to come up in the polls, that people understood our message and they agreed with it. And even some people who weren't voting for us indicated that they appreciated what we had to say and frankly thought that our argument was quite valid.
To use your line, though, every one of the leaders has said, and you talked about polls a couple of days ago, that the only poll that counts is the one on Election Day. It's now been held.
That's right. That's right. And sometimes in a three-party system, you can work very hard and you can get caught in the splits. And the splits will give you a result that maybe isn't what you deserved. You maybe deserve better, but that's the result in a three-party system.
Who does your party represent now, Mr. Hampton?
Oh, I think we're going to continue to work on the same issues we've always worked on. We've always believed in fighting for a better society, for working families. We've always believed in a fair distribution of wealth, a greater amount of social justice and economic justice, Medicare, a public education system, and we're going to continue to carry on those fights for all the people of the province.
But really, Mr. Hampton, how effective will that fight be if you don't hit that number 12 of official party status?
Well, I'm still waiting for the final results tonight. I don't have them, and I don't think anyone else does. So we'll see about that. It won't be the first time that New Democrats in Ontario or elsewhere have had to carry on the fight without party status. If that is the result, I'm not convinced it will be.
We can get away from politics a little bit to the personal side. Is your heart broken?
No, I wouldn't say I'm heartbroken. I'm disappointed. But I've had political disappointments before. I mean, I've fought elections before and not won. I fought election campaigns where I was hoping we would get elected as government, and we haven't won. So this is part of what you have to be prepared to live with in politics, and I can handle it. But I would have wished for a better result for the people of Ontario and for New Democrats generally.
I realize you'd probably like to have Shelley Martel, your wife, beside you, but she is in her own riding of Nickel Belt, which she has won. Did you speak on the phone, or what did you say?
Yeah, we've talked a couple of times tonight, and I'm very happy for her. Of course, there was never any doubt that she would win. She's a very, very effective campaigner. I'm just looking forward for the chance for the two of us and our children to spend some time together again. It's been 29 tough days.
And finally, what did you say to the other two leaders, Mr. McGuinty and Mr. Harris, when you called them?
Well, I simply congratulated them. I may fundamentally disagree with Mike Harris and his approach to Ontario, but Mr. Harris has won a majority. The people have decided. Mr. McGuinty fought a tough campaign, as I did, and I think he deserves to be congratulated too.
Mr. Hampton, you said in your speech you wanted to party. Well, party hardy. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. Some reaction now from Peter Van Dusen and our panel of three politicians. Peter?
Well, again, we hear from Howard Hampton, Ruth Greer, who's clearly down on the evening, and he has every right to be, given the results tonight, but already looking forward, and a man seeming to be committed to redoubling the effort and taking on the next challenge.
That's Howard. He's indomitable. He's a hockey player. He'll come out for the next period, and he'll be fighting. I mean, he had a very tough fight in his own riding. It's a huge riding, and his opponent, Frank McLash, had been there for a while and is on the ground in the riding, whereas Howie was fighting province-wide. And so I think the sweetness in tonight is that he has held his own riding, and I think for the party that's very important, of course. And I hope he takes a rest and a holiday, and he'll be there, and we'll be there to follow him.
He's very gracious tonight, as we've mentioned already. Would he? I'm wondering, would he be so gracious if he had a chance to sit down with some of the top union leaders in this province, who, in a sense, organize strategic voting and urge people to be very careful about where they put their traditional NDP support. He can't be happy about that.
I think a lot of this campaign is, after the aftermath, is going to be an analysis of, quote, strategic voting, because certainly strategic voting became a vote for the Liberals is the only way to defeat Mike Harris. And I think some of the people who bought into strategic voting and advocated it, and who legitimised on the part of unions who had traditionally voted the NDP the ability to go and vote for the Liberals, will perhaps think again as to whether that was the wise thing to do.
Let me be fair, he wasn't entirely on his own during this campaign. The Tories were doing everything they could to help him. They said he was principled. They tried to resurrect him. They were trying to pump oxygen.
The Tories didn't need him, David.
They were trying to pump oxygen into this
own.
whole course. I mean, let's not be fair about this, because the Tories were trying to influence. They've done for years. And so they've always had this unholy alliance, but that's okay.
He was their toughest
The issue
opponent.
tonight is that I think Howie handled it well. And you know, it's not easy having Suhana asking him tough questions, personal questions. As Ruth said, not having your wife there to be able to share a moment of sadness as well as the elation. So I think at the end of the day, this isn't the night to figure out everything that's going to happen in the future.
But certainly a lot of New Democrats tonight will be talking about what happened behind the scenes in this election campaign, regardless of the move at Hampton headquarters.
Are you saying they're going to get the knives out and go after? How is that?
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah, well, it's not worth much. They'll analyze better tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll continue to analyze here the next day.
They'll have better thoughts in the morning.
Thank you, Peter. Oh, we know what the headlines will say in the morning. A couple of more ridings for you that we have not heard from because there were polls that closed late, and that delay, of course, led to the zeros earlier. But here we are in Davenport, the battle of the Tonys. Tony Ruprecht, the Liberal, in lead over Tony Salipo. Both of them want to come back to the House. Eduardo Marcos, the New Democrat, in third place.
It's early yet, but if these results hold, that's another New Democrat who's not going to be coming back to the caucus table with Howard Hampton. Just talked to him about that. It's difficult to be effective without official party status.
And in Simcoe Grey, Jim Wilson in the lead here, and what a lead it is. But this one has this riding has the highest plurality in redistribution. So, I mean, I'm sure he's comfortable.
It's not a surprise there. Jim Wilson is the energy minister in this government.
We'll go over to Francis Lankin headquarters now, where Paul Riley is standing by with more reaction to these numbers we see on our mini board of the New Democrats sitting at 9. Paul?
Thank you, Suhana. And Francis Lankin has said it's mixed emotions that she's feeling tonight. Francis?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm absolutely thrilled with the results here, and in a number of ridings. I mean, my good friend Marilyn Shirley will be there with me again, and a number of New Democrats. But of course, we're disappointed to see the government come back with a majority, and we're disappointed in the number of seats overall. I think Howard ran a wonderful campaign. I think once people actually got to the debate, got to see him and hear him, they started coming to us. Maybe with a bit more time, it would have been better. But one thing you can count on is, irrespective of how many or how few, our voices will be strong. We will be there, with or without official party status, continuing to represent those Ontarians who care about healthcare, education, community services.
Without that official party status, what does that mean? What has been taken away from you guys?
Well, if that prevails, it means that there won't be a budget for caucus research, that there'll be less support for our ability to communicate our message to the public from a central caucus perspective. But you know, we've been small numbers before, and one of my favorite sayings about the group of us is that we may be small, but we're mighty, and I think you will continue to hear the mighty roar from the NDP.
Okay. Thank you very much, Francis. It was expected to be a close race down here tonight. It certainly wasn't. Francis Lankin walked away with it once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back to you, Savannah.
Thank you, Paul. And we can almost hear those cheers that Francis Lankin, probably bittersweet for her as well, from her riding of Beaches in the Beaches. We've got a couple of new elects for you. Ridings that were late because of the polls closed in Davenport. Tony Ruprecht, despite the fact that there were 2 hospitals of big issue here and 4 schools slated to close, Tony Ruprecht will be coming back over Tony Salipo.
And that means that former cabinet ministers Tony Salipo will not be coming back to Queen's Park. This was expected to be a close race, but Tony Salipo, if we look at the trend across the province, is down with the NDP, and their total vote is down quite significantly from 1995.
Jim Wilson comes back for his 3rd term, former health minister, now Minister of Energy. So a healthy lead, you would say there. And over in London West, Bob Wood, not elected yet, but leading in the polls. 200 of those have been reported at this point. We'll go up to Ottawa, away from London West, and find out what Chris Goldrick is up to at Dalton McGuinty's headquarters. Chris?
Thanks a lot, Sue Hannah. As you mentioned, we're still here in Ottawa. Dalton McGuinty expected here in about 4 minutes. The mood, well, their Liberals are excited that they managed to, well, excited is probably too strong a word. They're trying to take something away from this experience, I guess, and pointing to the fact that they increased their popular vote as a positive coming out of what is probably a pretty dismal evening for most Liberals. But Dalton McGuinty expected here in about 4 minutes. He originally was going to do one-on-one interviews with all the reporters here. That's been canceled, so if that's any indication, he probably just wants to say a few words up at the front and then go home, and he's scheduled a news conference for tomorrow at 1 o'clock just to update his and I guess the party's future. He has said previously that he will stick around for another fight, but I guess we'll get clarification in a few minutes and again tomorrow.
Chris, what about the mood there in the room with the campaign workers who have been working so closely with Dalton McGuinty over these past 28 days?
Well, it's, as you can expect, it's a difficult night for them. The internal polling that we heard about from the Liberals seems to suggest that there was some momentum coming at the end of this campaign, but obviously not quite enough. It seemed that coming out of the debate, there was quite a drop in Liberal support, at least according to the internal polls, and they had hoped that the numbers had been building over the last couple of weeks approximately of the campaign, but obviously not enough.
And what do you think when it comes to strategic voting, Chris? Dalton McGuinty was telling everyone, go out and vote strategically for your Liberal candidate. Voters must have rejected that thought, but what we see in the total vote is very, very close.
Absolutely. My own personal feeling is that once the polls showed the Tories with a considerable lead, that some NDP supporters decided to stick with their party, sort of thinking that there was no chance that the Liberals could actually win. But then when you look at the popular support, it's very close. So it's sort of a night of contradictions, but certainly a difficult night for the Liberals.
Howard Hampton has spoken with Liberal leader Dalton McGuinty. I'm not sure if up there in Ottawa you had time with all of those workers around you and conversations to hear that he did speak with Dalton McGuinty to congratulate him on the support that he did get, and I'm assuming that we'll hear what Dalton McGuinty's reply was to Howard Hampton. So Chris, we'll come back to you when we see Dalton McGuinty coming up to speak to the workers that have helped him so much.
Okay, we'll see you then.
Okay.
All right.
Robin, what really is at stake for Dalton McGuinty now?
I think what we're seeing here is that he's improved his party standings from the last election. They've got something to build on here. And because it looks as though at this point the New Democrats won't be the third party in the legislature, they won't have official party status anyway, he has a chance here to form a strong opposition. We've talked about before about the fact that this is the first time that Dalton McGuinty is running an election as the leader. He may have another chance at this. He will have another chance at this, coming in with these strong numbers into the legislature. And I think we have a chance to have a very strong voice in the legislature with Dalton McGuinty at this number, around 34.
That has got to be a real pressure-filled time, stress and strain of a first campaign as a leader, also the first debate, and there were some concerns about his performance. His very wooden style was criticized in that debate. So do you stick around and build on a leader? There was talk of Gerard Kennedy, of course, during the leadership convention that we covered together. What do you do at this point?
I think at this level, when you've got a situation where their total vote support, when you look at the percentages up, there is a chance for Dalton McGuinty to stay around. He didn't perform well, I think, by all accounts in that debate, but he came into this election sort of with a bar raised pretty high, because before even a lot of the voters could recognize him or know who he was the target of a campaign by the Conservatives that he's just not up to the job line, seemed to follow him around, as I said, as he was out there meeting voters, and a lot of them couldn't even recognize him at that point.
One of the things that Hampton had mentioned is he called them Mike Harris 1, and of course referred to Liberal leader Dalton McGuinty as Mike Harris 2. Could that lack of distinction perhaps have hurt him as well, not being able to distinguish himself well enough and clearly enough from the Conservatives? So I guess the question would be, why take if you could have the real thing, I suppose, if you want that conservative majority, why take the second best?
Well, leadership was definitely an issue in this campaign, and I think a lot of people felt that Mike Harris was a very effective leader, and that label of weak leader that Mr. Harris put on Dalton McGuinty very early, even before the campaign was called, probably stuck in some voters' minds. Even when he was out doing a lot of the main streeting, the handshaking that he was doing, and I was following him on some of those trips, a lot of people said, well, I don't know what you stand for. What are you going to do that's different? And I think it's in some cases his message didn't get across. It did get across strongly enough, though, for them to increase their support. They're looking at approximately 34 seats in the legislature. We don't have the final numbers on that yet, of course. That's a pretty good showing.
Okay. We'll go up to Eastern Ontario, to the Civic Centre, where Tim Murphy, the campaign director for for Dalton McGuinty, is at the podium, which means, I'm assuming, that we are expecting the leader himself to come out soon. And this may be it. The television lights, of course, go on whenever something of import is happening. Dalton McGuinty with his wife Terry now entering the Civic Centre Salon in Ottawa. And, you know, we talked about having to smile, being gracious about it. We can see that obviously he's not thrilled, but he is shaking the hands of his workers who have given so much of their effort and time. It'll be interesting to hear what he has to say to them tonight.
This, of course, is the tradition in elections where the person who wins the fewest seats gets up first to give their speech, makes that call, congratulating the other leaders. Then we see number 2 making his way to the podium here with lots of supporters. I spoke with Dalton McGuinty last week. He was expecting that 7 of his 9 siblings would be there tonight to support him.
Yes, he's got 4 brothers and 5 sisters.
That's right, 10 in the family.
His mom must be a strong woman.
They're there tonight to support him. 2 of them couldn't make it for personal reasons, but he's got a lot of support behind him. We talked about Howard Hampton being there on his own.
Yes.
And I think it's a little bit easier here for Dalton McGuinty.
He's got 4 kids of his own as well, 3 of them in high school. And he's got to sit down, I suppose, and explain this loss, because really that's what it is. He did not take the government as he was saying he would in the last days of the campaign, all throughout it, as a matter of fact.
We talked a little bit about leadership. Of course, there are going to be questions about what went wrong with his campaign, why the messages the Liberals were sending wasn't resonating more with voters. We'll listen and hear what Dalton McGuinty has to say tonight to those supporters. We're probably going to clap for a few minutes more.
Oh, I'm sure we'll hear the chants and the end of a tough, what must have seemed more like weeks and weeks on end. Really, in fact, it was only 28 days of this campaign, and that number was reduced. It was 37 in 1995. In fact, Dalton McGuinty had the campaign for 28 days, but I was on his bus, and he said certainly no comforts of home there.
And again, that shorter campaign is seen as a disadvantage when you're running for the first time. You don't have that name recognition, that face recognition that Mike Harris would have.
Dalton McGuinty at the podium, leader of the Liberal Party. Let's listen in to what he has to say.
Thank you, and thank you very much. And welcome to the People's Campaign. The campaign that fought so hard to put the people of Ontario first by protecting their health care and protecting their education. And I want to tell you that it has been a distinct privilege and honor to lead you in this fight. And I've got to tell you at the same time that this fight is not over. I want you all to be very proud of yourselves. We have fought a good fight and for all the right reasons. We fought for some of those things that Ontario families simply have to be able to count on. Good schools, good hospitals, good health care, good education. And something else we wanted to do was to finally bring an end to the fighting in our province so that we might start working together. And I'm very proud tonight to say that close to 2 million Ontarians voted Liberal today. More than half of Ontario voters have said that they want change. And they made that statement in the most compelling, powerful, and eloquent way possible. They did it through their ballots. And they said they don't want any more cuts to our health care. They don't want any more cuts to our education. They want the fighting to stop. They want Ontarians to start working together so that together we might embrace all of the opportunities that the 21st century holds for us and our children. La population de l'Ontario a dit clairement que le genre de gouvernement de Mike Harris n'est pas le genre de gouvernement qu'elle veut. But let's understand, Mike Harris has won a majority of seats tonight. No, we live in a democracy, and Mr. Harris, in a fair and free election, has won the right, the responsibility, and the privilege to govern. I spoke to him just a few minutes ago and offered him my congratulations. I did the same thing to Howard Hampton. Well, I'll tell you that I am pleased and proud to say for the first time in 12 years after an election, our party has grown. We went into this election in the new Ontario 103-seat legislature with 23 seats, and at last count we have 34. And you know, you should understand that our campaign to put people first has drawn in thousands of people from right across the province. People who used to vote NDP and people who used to vote PC. People who decided that when it came right down to it, it was important that together we do the right thing. And that we put our health care and our education ahead of a tax cut. I want to give you my personal assurance as leader of this new movement, because that's what it is. It's a new movement. We are transforming the People's Campaign into the People's Movement. And I want to tell you that we will continue to fight for all those things that the majority of this province believe in, and it is my honor and privilege to lead that fight. To everyone who worked so hard in this campaign, I offer my most sincere thanks. And to all our candidates, those who were victorious and those who did not meet with success in the ballot box, I want to say that each and every one of you did a marvelous job. Now there's going to be all kinds, listen, look, I'll tell you right up front, there's going to be all kinds of post-electoral analysis. They'll pore over the entrails and read the tea leaves. But I want to tell you, I am proud of everything that we did in this campaign and everybody who pulled together. I have no regrets. None. None. I'm proud of the work that we did together, and I want to tell you that it was a real privilege as a boy from Alta Vista. A real privilege to run for premier in the greatest province in the greatest country in the world. Now, of course, the people of Ontario deserve no less than our best, and that's exactly what we'll give them, day in and day out. The very best opposition to Mike Harris and his efforts to attack health care and education that any Ontario legislature has ever put forward. And we're going to fight for a decent Ontario. We're going to fight for a decent Ontario for all families. And remember the Liberal way. We don't care how much money you have. We don't care how long you've been here. We don't care where you come from. We don't care who you're connected to. We don't care about your station in life. If you live in our province, you're one of ours, and we're going to look after you. I want to thank the people of Ottawa South for once again placing their trust in me. Leadership often requires that I spend a lot of time outside the riding, and I'm grateful for the fact that people of Ottawa South have been so understanding of my absences, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to work for them for the next 4 years. I can't stand here tonight on the stage and not think of my dad, who had the seat before me, and who impressed upon all of us, his children, the value of public service. He used to say, remember, public service, the reward of public service can be found in the service itself. And that's so true. want to thank Terry and my 4 kids. They have always been there with their love and their support and tolerated the prolonged absences. They know that this fight is terribly important to me and that I'm fighting on behalf of families just like ours in every corner of the province. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Mais mes derniers mots, j'aimerais les réserver aux nombreux et nombreuses Ontariens et Ontariennes qui ont voté pour nous. Nous n'allons pas vous laisser tomber. Finally, to the close to 2 million Ontarians who voted for us today, I send my final thanks and my solemn commitment. We won't let you down. We'll continue to fight on your behalf. We'll fight for those things that Ontario families simply need to be able to count on. Good schools, good hospitals. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Dalton McGuinty in Ottawa, and his speeches over those are his children and, of course, his wife, Terry McGuinty, there as well. He thanked his family for their support during the 28-day campaign, which obviously showed on his face. And when he spoke about his father, that was the emotional moment for him in that speech. But let's get some analysis from our panel, because we've got David Peterson, who has been in this position as Liberal leader and probably has a few thoughts about what Dalton McGuinty is going through. I'll throw it to Peter Van Dusen.
And David Peterson, you've had to make a speech like this in your career. Tell me a little bit about...
I've won some and I've lost one, you know, and I mean...
He struck a note there.
But his expectations were different this time.
Yeah.
Nobody expected he was going to win this election. He did far better, I think, than most people expected going in terms of seat count and in terms of popular vote. And I think he has shown a tremendous character. Let me tell you something, just in human terms, it is not easy going through a campaign. When you're carrying the can, when you're carrying, and you're the leader, you're carrying the scrutiny of the press and the demonstrations. I don't care whether you're Michael Harris, Dalton McGuinty, or Howie Hampton. And it's a tough go. And there's a lot of pressure. And I think you saw in Dalton McGuinty a lot of strength, a lot of character. He looked good tonight. He doesn't look beaten up. Still a lot of fight. Lots of fight left, and he doesn't look beaten up. He still looks fresh and young, and he is energetic. He'll be there fighting ahead. So he'll be leading this party for the next 4 years. I think he knows what he believes in. He knows what's important to him. He knows what the fight's about. He knows the province a lot better. I think he will be a considerable and significant political force over the next few years. And the next campaign, he'll be leading the party. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I wouldn't disagree with that, and I think he has shown a great deal of growth through the campaign. I mean, he'll go into the next campaign much better than he went into this one. And I think that was a good speech, and he obviously intends to stay on. So it'll be interesting. We will have a rematch, presumably, 4 or 5 years from now.
I think Dalton obviously improved the Liberal numbers, and he can take some significant satisfaction in that. And certainly tonight he was his feisty self. I think he has a couple of very interesting things on the horizon. I think as the NDP improves, if indeed they improve, one has to think that some of the Liberal vote may go back to where it has traditionally been. I think the other aspect is
that the Tories could decline, Charlie?
I think the other aspect is that as Dalton talks about being the party for families and for people, one has to reflect on the fact that strategic voting sent to his party the number of special interests that were out protesting, and I'm not so sure that they necessarily represent the broad public. I think they don't represent the broad public.
He made a bit of a preemptive strike in that speech. If you heard him, he said, the experts will want to dissect what we did. I'm proud of every single thing we did. Can he stand by that, David Peterson?
Sure he can, and I think he ran a good campaign. He showed character, and he was on theme, he was on message, and he kept repeating it and working at it and trying to drive out the message. Was he effective every day? Some days were better than others. But I think that he's done an extremely good job. But let me just make another point. 4 years or 5 years from now, the campaign will be quite different. It'll be different issues that drive it, different kinds of things. But he's gained in character and in stature, as is Howie Hampton, and so is Michael Harris.
Okay, I think we'll shift things to North Bay here, because I think we have the arrival of the Premier in North Bay.
Every single citizen.
Is Mike wearing that same blue shirt for the whole campaign? That's what I want to know.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome.
We've seen this picture for many, many occasions over the 28 days. Mike Harris, his wife Janet, coming off a bus, also security guards. This time, however, it's not the campaign. It's election night. Mike Harris is going to come back to Queen's Park with his majority Conservative government as the Premier. We'll hear and wait for him to speak, see what he has to say to his campaign workers for their support.
We see him entering the campaign headquarters here with his wife Janet, who's been beside him for much of this campaign, his son Jeffrey and his other son Mike Jr. They're entering to a lot of support. I don't think this is like a campaign stop for Mr. Harris in one way, and that's there are no protesters.
Exactly. I was just going to say that usually there are people who are shouting him down. In this case, he's getting pats on the back and handshakes and a big smile from Mike Harris, who took this riding in 1995 with 60% of the total vote, and of course beat George Maroussas in this election with quite a win. I can't remember what the exact numbers are, but he certainly has taken this riding.
He's been a member of the legislature since 1981. That's when he first came to Queen's Park, long before he was leader. He's grown a lot since then. He's defined now as being a very strong leader. Leadership was a key in this campaign. I think a lot of the people who supported Mr. Harris believe that he's a strong leader. He'll implement his agenda, the blueprint agenda.
I suppose we can talk about the budget. And I'm just getting word that Mr. Harris, in fact, took this riding with 50% of the total vote. So last year 60%, this year, however, 50%, but that still puts him back at Queen's Park with a Conservative majority government behind him.
They still have a lot of the total vote when you look across the province and you count up the percentage-wise, but they are coming back, if you look at the numbers at the bottom of our screen again, with fewer seats than you might have expected in redistribution. If you took the results from 1995 and transposed them over the new boundaries, we would have expected the Conservatives, if they came back with the same level of support, to have about 72 seats in the majority government. They've got about 60 at this point in the night.
So 52 is the magic number. There are 8 left. Do you have to start counting your members to make sure they're in the House and not sleeping and all that kind of stuff when you're at this point of a majority?
I think at this point they've got a fairly comfortable majority. It might be a bit of a surprise, as I said, that there aren't a few more seats added on, and maybe by the end of the night we might see 1 or 2 more. But I think it's a big enough a majority. It's a working majority that allows Mr. Harris to implement the Conservative agenda.
Let's talk about that agenda, because we heard much of it, of course, in the budget that came down before Election Day was called on May 5th. Mr. Eves brought down another tax cut in that budget of 20%. We also heard about spending initiatives, which was quite a difference from what we had heard in previous budgets. So what happens to that budget now?
I think what we're going to be looking for on a lot of the promises that were made by this government is to see whether they're going to back off at all or slow down. They were criticized a lot in their first term in government for moving too fast, for really making the changes too quickly before people had a chance to have their say, to make some suggestions about how they might be implemented better in education, in healthcare. The welfare cut was implemented very quickly. We're expecting now, if they go ahead with the budget as planned, and there's no reason why they shouldn't, that there will be a 20% cut in the personal income tax, the provincial portion of your personal income tax. That's on top of the 30% we've already seen. Another 20% in your property tax. That I assume is a popular measure with voters. Always more money back in your pocket is attractive. Mr. Harris knows that. He was often campaigning with his jar of loonies. At one point it was a piece of jeans, a statue of jeans with loonies in it. He was offering the voters more money in their pockets to go out and spend as they wish.
In fact, when we had our tour with David Bogart, who is one of the Queen's Park guides, he took us into the Premier's office, which is not, of course, on the official tour, but we had an insider's tour, which was wonderful, and into the Premier's office, which has been the same office held by the Premier ever since this building was built in 1893. And he's got a jar. It looks like a cookie jar almost, but on it says common sense on it. So a jar of common sense to remind Mr. Harris, I suppose, every day of what he intends to do.
And now we move from the years of common sense to the years of blueprint. We'll see what kind of blueprint Mr. Harris puts on this province for another 5 years. He's making his way through that crowd of supporters. It's funny how long it takes the leader who wins at the end of the night to make its way through the crowd.
But I guess, you want this moment to last, because tomorrow you wake up and you've got to start implementing things and answering some tough questions. And again, it's being held to account. On this night here, I suppose you take that walk up to the stage and make it last, because it must feel good. We saw Howard Hampton make a similar walk about an hour ago. His was a little bit different, and his speech, of course, very emotional. We're going to hear some words from Mike Harris that will probably reaffirm his commitment to Blueprint and the policies of the Conservative government. His two sons there, and Janet Harris, as you mentioned, his wife, who has been with him on this campaign trail. I've seen her on many stops, and we had our interview with Mike Harris, of course, in Grafton. She was there as well. I did not see the boys at that time, but it must have been a long haul for them. Let's listen to the leader of the Conservatives, Mike Harris.
Thank you very much. I'll tell you, as I speak to the province and all across this great province of Ontario, the first thing I want to do is thank the people of Nipissing. Some thought it was Jeffrey's bus driving. Some thought it was Michael's hairdo. It really was Janet. To the people of Nipissing, I want to thank you for giving me the privilege of serving a 6th term as your representative at Queen's Park. And I want you to know that I have never forgotten where I come from. The values, my friends, the values that I learned from my mother and my father as I was growing up in North Bay, the principles of integrity, of honesty, of the work ethic, these in fact are the same values that guide me as Premier of the province of Ontario. My mom and dad survived the Depression of the 30s, the challenges of the war years. They went on to raise a family. They came to North Bay, and they started their own business to fulfill their dream. They worked hard. They were active in this community. They raised 2 great children. My older brother Sid and my younger sister Mary. And somehow or other they were able to put up with me. They were hard-working people, but there are hard-working people like my parents in towns and in communities and in villages and in cities all across this province who overcome adversity, who raise families, and who contribute to their communities every day. And that is what makes this province great. It's people. Individuals with a sense of community, a responsibility to family and to hard work. People who love their country, who cherish the freedoms that we enjoy in the greatest country on earth. And my friends, I want you to know that it is a privilege to serve as your local member in Nipissing and a privilege to serve as Premier of this great province. And I want to thank a few people. I want to thank Barb Minogue and our local Nipissing campaign team. And the whole campaign team for a job well done. Congratulations and thanks to our provincial campaign team, Tom and Leslie and all the staff in Toronto. The people on the campaign bus, all the workers in the ridings, the thousands and thousands of volunteers all across this province. My friends, this has been one of the hardest fought campaigns in recent memory. You faced some very stiff opposition. Your extra efforts, your dedication, and your strength of purpose truly made the difference in this campaign. And I want you to know that here in Nipissing and all across this province, Janet and I thank each and every one of you, and we will always remember your contribution. I want to pay special tribute to all of those who chose to run for elected office. It takes a strong personal commitment to put your name on a ballot. It is even harder to withstand the pressure and the public scrutiny of a campaign, not only for the candidate, but for their families as well. So tonight, I want to salute Dalton McGuinty. I want to salute Howard Hampton and all the candidates from every political party for your commitment to the democratic process. Friends, here in Nipissing, congratulations to George Marousas, to Wendy Young, and a special tribute to Jamie Board, a young lady committed to a cause who had the courage to put her name forward for the Green Party for what she believed in this riding. After teaching her how to ski, I didn't know she was going to run against me, but many members representing all three parties will not be returning to the legislature. We thank them for their contribution and for their years of public service, and their absence will be felt. My friends, "29 days ago, our government was dissolved. And tonight, for the first time in over 30 years, a majority progressive conservative government has been succeeded by a majority progressive conservative government. You know, we have worked hard to earn the people's confidence, and we should be proud of our efforts. We must remember, however, that public service is a privilege. In our democracy, the ultimate decision always belongs to the voters. Their continued confidence is a humbling responsibility. I guess I'd like to speak tonight directly to all the people of Ontario. 4 years ago, you sent me to do a job. You placed your faith in our team and our plan, and we have done our very best to implement that plan and to keep your faith. Consider what we have accomplished. There is a new pride in Ontario. Our economy is back on track. We lead Canada in job creation. We lead the industrialized world now in growth. My friends, faith in our future has been restored. And now you have sent me back to work with a new plan and with a renewed team. And I will honor your trust. I will work hard to keep Ontario on the right track. I will fight to protect all that we have gained as a province. J'apprécie votre confiance. Je ferai tout pour maintenir l'Ontario
possible
dans la bonne voie.
so that Ontario will be on the right course.
Pour protéger
I
nos
will
gains.
protect what we have obtained.
You know, I will continue to work as well with all the premiers and with the Prime Minister to build on the prosperity of this great nation of Canada. This prosperity is what allows us to afford the important services that we value and cherish as Canadians, such as reliable health care, quality education, and safe and compassionate communities. My friends, and in working together on these goals in our provinces and with the federal government, we will ensure a strong and a prosperous and a growing and a strong and united Canada. And my friends, by their nature, elections involve choices, and they highlight differences in approach. During this election, we had a healthy democratic debate. And yes, there were some who exercised their democratic right to protest. I've heard some who believe that for every winner in our society, there has to be a loser. I do not believe that. I believe every Ontarian deserves a fair and an equal opportunity to be a winner. I believe that a rising tide can lift all boats. I believe that everyone in this great and prosperous province, in this great and prosperous country, can be a winner, and that is our goal. Now, tonight, I want to mention three individuals in particular who followed us around at most of our campaign stops during this election. They traveled across Ontario in a painted ambulance. They stood outside our events in Cornwall and in Essex. They demonstrated our events in urban centres and in rural Ontario. And at the end of the campaign, in a parking lot in Toronto, I walked over to their protest vehicle and I extended my hand to those three dedicated paramedics. We shook hands. And we agreed that we could work together. And we agreed that together we can provide quality health care for every Ontarian in this province. So tonight, I extend my hand to others, regardless of how you voted. I want you to know that my commitment is that we will move forward together. We will work with everyone who is willing to extend their hand to make Ontario the best place in North America to live, to work, to invest, and to raise a family. And in doing so, we will listen with particular care to the ordinary people who all too often are not heard by government. Hard-working families, struggling to make ends meet, law-abiding citizens concerned about the safety of their communities, parents who want to give their children the best education and opportunities for the future. And once again, we will do what we have said we will do. We will cut income taxes again. We will cut property taxes. We will invest in health care. And we will build the province's infrastructure for the 21st century. And above all, we will always remember our roots. My friends, in closing, I want to thank my family for their patience, for their understanding, and for their support. My mother, who taught me values that guide me to this day. I'm also thinking of my dad tonight, who I believe is very proud right now. My wife, Janet, my best friend for 25 years and a great campaigner. And my sons, Michael and Jeffrey, who inspire me to build a better Ontario. And so, my friends, so let us tonight, let us rededicate ourselves to securing a brighter future for all the children of this province. Let us work together to provide hope and opportunity for all Ontarians. Ce soir, nous nous engageons à nouveau à assurer un avenir
to ensure a future, a more promising future for all the children of this province.
My friends, let us move forward together to a new tomorrow, a new millennium, knowing that for Ontario and for all Ontarians, the very best is yet to come. Thank you very much.
Quite the reception for leader Mike Harris with his family, Janet, of course, and his two boys there. This is a speech of promises to continue along the same track that Mike Harris had started with his Common Sense Revolution, of course, in 1995. So we will see blueprint over the next 4 years. Of course, it is a 5-year mandate, however. 3.5 hours of election night 99 now, and the voters have spoken. Mike Harris wins his second majority government, but without ministers Dave Johnson, Isabel Bassett, and Nobel Villeneuve. McGuinty, Kennedy, McLeod, and Phillips are back, but only 30 other Liberals will join them. Hampton, Churley, Lankin, Cormos, 4 of the 9 New Democrats to return without official party status. That's the story as it stands now. And we would like to say goodbye to our audience in Windsor and Ottawa. But for the rest of the province, stay with us. We will continue with Ontario 99. We mentioned that the Conservatives will be back, of course, with a majority in this park, but missing 3 big names, Isabel Bassett, Nobel Villeneuve, and Dave Johnson. Speaking of Dave Johnson, Adam Vaughan is with Dave Johnson now live. Adam.
Thanks very much, Suhanna. It's pretty tough to find long faces on Tories in this province tonight, but there's some long faces here. It's been a tough night for you, Dave Johnson. What happened?
No long faces here. It was a great victory across the province of Ontario, and Premier Harris said the best is yet to come in the province of Ontario, and I firmly believe that. Well, they threw everything but the kitchen sink at us here in this riding. Apparently, I was to be the targeted one. The unions, various special interest groups, etc., etc. We ran a great campaign. We got a lot of votes. Just didn't quite get enough.
It seems to be the only riding where strategic voting took hold. What happened to the NDP vote here?
I really don't know. We were hoping the NDP would have their traditional number of votes, but they seemed to poll very poorly. They didn't seem to put much into the campaign. But nevertheless, I mean, the main theme tonight is one of rejoicing here that the party has a second mandate, a second majority government. I think that'll be good for Ontario.
And one of the things that seemed to have happened here is that all the ministries you ran into trouble in, Health and Education Management Board with the strikes of the teachers, hospital closings, the strike with OPSEU, all of them seem to gang up on you. You wish you'd stayed still in one of the ministries.
Well, I did what I thought was best for Ontario, and the Premier did what we thought was best for Ontario, and I think tonight the people said, yes, what you're doing is best for Ontario. But maybe along the way I made a few enemies. I don't know. I guess that's possible, and they certainly found their way into Don Valley East to give a hand to the Liberals. But we had a great team, and we had a tremendous fight. The NDP vote collapsed, and we didn't make it.
Is this your last night standing in front of an election audience?
Well, I did come from the private sector originally back many years ago, and I think I'll probably look at various opportunities. So I have been in politics now for about 26 years. That's a long time. Maybe it's time for a change.
Now, I saw Alan Tonks here earlier. You got Denzil Minnan-Wong, Gordon Chong, a lot of city politicians around. There's talk that there may be a mayor's job open in a couple of months. Are you thinking about running again locally ever again?
You know what I'm thinking of? Right now I'm thinking of having good sleep tonight and not getting up very early tomorrow morning.
That's not a no. That's not a no.
I haven't even thought of it. I'm just really delighted with the overall results tonight, and if there's any way I can help Mike Harris and the government, that's one possibility. Who knows? I haven't had a chance really to look at all the possibilities that may be open to me.
Now, Mike Harris talked about reaching a hand out across the table to people that have fought very hard in this campaign to take his government down. Do you think there is room for dialogue between you and the nurses, within your government and the nurses, between your government and OPSEU, within your government and the teachers?
Well, I lost here in Don Valley East, and I respect the opinion of the voters. I hope graciously accept their views on the election here in Don Valley East. And I hope the people who are opposing this government across Ontario take the same view, that Mike Harris has given a mandate, a clear mandate with regard to economic policies, healthcare policies, education policies, all contained in the blueprint. And I hope that those who have been fighting the government get together. The Premier said he extends his hand. Anybody that's willing to work within that plan to the future, to the betterment of the future, then he's willing to work with, and I believe him. And I hope that those who've been fighting the government look at it that way as well.
No one could recite the common sense revolution like you could. Well done. Tough luck tonight, but we'll look for you again, maybe.
Well, you never know. There's always future possibilities. We won't close all the doors.
Thanks a lot. Back to you, Suhanna.
Thank you, Adam. Dave Johnson there, Education Minister. Perhaps, as Adam says, we should look for him in local politics. But let's look over to a man who sat at that cabinet table, Charles Harnick, with Dave Johnson, to get some reaction. Peter Van Dusen, you've got the panel.
Thank you, Suhanna, and you've lost one of the big guns in cabinet in Dave Johnson. Some of the things he talked about, Charles Harnick, and some of the things Mike Harris talked about, extending that olive branch, but making it very clear that he said we will do what we said we would do. What are the next 4 years going to be like in this province?
I think that the Premier was very clear that he does want to extend the olive branch. He does want to work with people within the context of what the democratic process produced tonight, and that was a historic mandate, a second majority with virtually the identical popular vote, and I think that the democratic process has to mean something to people, and I think that when you take a look at the proportion of this victory tonight, one has to say that the mainstream the majority adopted and voted for the blueprint that was put in front of the public, and as well, they also endorsed the record of this government over the last 4 years.
Okay, but do we get the same degree of fervor, I guess, and the same passion in driving that blueprint the way Mike Harris drove the common sense revolution? Do you think there's some edge coming off it at all?
I think there's an edge coming off it. I think the province is very different today than it was in 1995. In 1995, we had significantly high unemployment. Today, we have the lowest unemployment in probably 2 decades. We've seen tremendous job creation, and I think that that makes the circumstances of this mandate very different. And I think that it is important for the government to get on with their agenda, to continue to do what they've done. But it's also important to remember that there was an endorsement of what we've been doing for the last 4 years.
Ruth and David, and I guess we'll start with Ruth. Do his opponents take him up on the offer? Here's the olive branch, reach out for it.
Well, I think that it's a difference in tone than certainly there was on election night the first time round. I think some of the opponents will take it up, but I think they'll also want to see, okay, is it just a token olive branch, or is there some real opportunities for dialogue, and is somebody going to listen and have some engagement in some of the issues? But I think it all depends on whether the economy continues strong, because if it doesn't, and he fulfills the blueprint, there's going to be some difficulties.
And David, I'm going to get a chance to come back to you. I'm going to cut away for a second and go back to Suhanna. We'll hear from you in just a bit. Suhanna?
Thank you, Peter. We have been talking about coloring the province, Robin and I, and you've got your coloring pencils out. You're going to do just that for us and tell us what has happened throughout this election evening.
That's exactly right. We showed you what the results looked like in 1995. Here are the results tonight. In the Metro Belt, we see not much of a change. The Conservatives haven't lost any of their support here. They're holding on to all that big blue belt. When we move on now to South Central, Hamilton, Niagara, we'll take a look at again. A lot of blue again. In fact, the Tories are only up in one region, only up 1 percentage point in southwestern Ontario. The rest of the regions, we're going to see that the Liberals are up and the NDP are down in every region. Let's move on to the next one. Eastern Ontario, we see it pretty evenly split between the blue and the red when we're coloring it here. And again, in Eastern Ontario, we see an increase in support when we're talking about the total vote, the percentage for the Liberals in this region. On to the next one now. In Northern Ontario, we showed you at the beginning of the night lots of red, lots of orange. The Tories are down slightly in Northern Ontario as well, but the NDP are down in Northern Ontario and the Liberals are up. Going on to the Ottawa region, we see it split between the blue and the red, the Conservatives and the Liberals. In Ottawa, there were 3 of the 4 seats went to the Conservatives. Or the Liberals, kept 3 of the 4 seats. Move on to Hamilton region, where we see some red for the Liberals and 1 NDP riding. That is David Christopherson, I believe, in Hamilton region. And when we go out to Windsor, lots of Liberal red there, loss in this region for the New Democrats. The Liberals, again, are up in every one of these regions. The NDP are down. We see almost a direct transfer of votes from the NDP to the Liberals, and the Liberals are only up in 1 riding in southwestern Ontario, and that's only by 1 percentage point. Here's the Toronto region, lots of colors here. The Conservatives, we mentioned that Dave Johnson lost in Toronto, Isabel Bassett lost in Toronto, 2 key cabinet ministers who aren't coming back. That's the Toronto region, what it looks like now after this 1999 election. Central Ontario, lots of Conservative blue here. The Conservatives are down only slightly. We should mention again when we're explaining the percentage of the total vote, the Conservatives didn't have to win a lot more than they had of the total vote last time because they had a Conservative majority after the 1995 election, and now they have a Conservative majority again as we go across the province. Southwestern Ontario, this, as I mentioned, is the one riding where the Conservatives are up slightly, but it's only 1 percentage point. The Liberals are up here and the New Democrats are down.
Robin, we've also got another way of showing people, our viewers, how the chamber will look at the end of the day with 60, 34, and 9 for the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the New Democrats. Take us through this amazing graphic.
This is our 3D animation. I love this graphic here. This will give us the number of seats in the legislature, 103 instead of 130 this time round. We'll look at the end of the night now. The Conservatives are coming back to form the Conservative majority government with 60 seats. The Liberals will have 34 of those seats in the legislature. The New Democrats only 9, not enough to afford them official party status. There were no independents, no minor parties taking any seats at all tonight. That adds up to 103.
I know the panel was talking about that 9 for the New Democrats and Ruth Greer, and let's get some more reaction with Peter Van Dusen and our 3 politicians here in the park. They're the only politicians in the park at this point, but boy, they're here.
Thank you, Suhanna. Thank you, Robin. And we wanted to pick up with David Peterson because that's where we left off. And I thought when Mike Harris was speaking, I thought I saw you turn to Charles Harnick when he mentioned shaking hands with the paramedics, saying it was so important for him to say that tonight. Why was
It's
that?
extremely important. Election campaigns, as Michael said, do exacerbate differences, and they sharpen differences, and they're tough. And then the winner has an obligation to govern for the entire province, not just his party, not just his people voted for him. And you've got to take a lot of things into account. And I think it was extremely important tonight for him and for the province to extend the hand to the victor. Has to be the big person in the circumstances. For him to extend a hand and invite everyone to come into the camp. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be differences, and there are. But it's important, in my view, for the government to function well in a free society, to be gracious, to be understanding, and invite everybody in. I think that was done tonight, and I think you'd have to say that was successfully done. Now,
Mike Harris and David, I can tell you, Mike Harris will be flattered by those where he is standing by, and your gracious words to him, because he's standing by, and Suhanna's going to speak to him now. Suhanna?
Thank you, Peter. Well, Mr. Harris is live in North Bay. We heard him speak with his family earlier. Mr. Harris, first of all, congratulations. Another majority. This is a record breaker since 1967. How comfortable a majority is it?
Well, Suhanna, I haven't looked at the final numbers, but it is a majority government, and it will give us a mandate to be able to implement our agenda, which I believe will, as David Peterson said, be good for all Ontarians, and we're certainly, that's our goal.
Well, you haven't looked at the numbers. Well, the CBC can tell you that you've got 60 seats, the Liberals have 34, and the New Democrats have 9. Mr. Harris, in your speech, you were talking about extending a hand. How specifically do you build consensus when this has been such a polarized campaign?
Well, some have chosen to polarize it, but I have not. I am there to meet with, to listen to work with all those who share our common goals. And there have been some who have felt the goals weren't the same. If it's higher quality education, then we should be working together. That's our goal. If it's quality health care, that's our goal, and we can work together. And I told you a story tonight of the 3 ambulance guys. I mean, they were the best protesters on the whole tour. They were consistent. They were there. They got lots of opportunities. They were on CBC quite a bit. And they came to me after the campaign, and I said to them, well, am I going to see you in 4 years? And they said, we know you're going to win, and we think we can work with you together, for a better Ontario, for better health care. And I was very touched by that, and I said, you're right, we can and we will.
Will you work any faster or slower? I'm wondering about the pace of change.
Well, we didn't have the luxury of a lot of time. When you're going bankrupt, when your infrastructure is deteriorating, when your quality of education is declining, when you haven't built anything significant in healthcare for 10 years, we had a lot of catch-up to do, and we moved very quickly to do that. Now, I think we have an opportunity to demonstrate that a lot of those changes were indeed in the best interest of Ontarians, and so now it's a time to implement them fully, because we're only part way through some of them.
But are we going to see a kinder, gentler Mike Harris? It's 4 years later, everybody gets a little older, and I guess gentler.
I've always
perhaps.
thought I'm a pretty kind, gentle guy, but I am firm. I am determined. We'll have more jobs, we'll have more growth, we'll have more prosperity, we'll have better health care, and I'll not be throwing off that agenda, but I'll work cooperatively with all those who share that agenda, and I think that's most of Ontario.
You won't be working with Dave Johnson, you won't be working with Isabel Bassett, you won't be working with Noble Villeneuve. You've lost 3 of your biggies. What does that say?
Well, I'm very disappointed, but sometimes, campaigns focus on ministers and on issues. There's no question that there's been nobody who's been more vigorous fighting for rural Ontario farmers than Noble Villeneuve. Isabel Bassett, I believe, was just coming into her own in a very good political career that's been cut short tonight, maybe temporarily, who knows. And Dave Johnson, he's the most tragic loss of all. There is not a more committed dedicated, kinder, gentler guy than Dave Johnson, whose goals were to improve education for every Ontario child. And I think the reforms that we've put in place, the fair funding formula, the quality agenda, I think it will go down in history as the most significant positive change in education in a long time.
But do you take Dave Johnson's defeat perhaps as a referendum on education, that 160 needs to be changed?
No, I think you saw the referendum on education tonight. It's 60 seats. It's a majority government. It's a very significant victory. I'm disappointed in Dave Johnson. He took on a new riding, and he took on a lot of opposition and a lot of focus, and I'm very proud of Dave Johnson.
Under redistribution, Mr. Harris, if we took the old seats that you had at 82, it would have turned into 72. In fact, it's 60. Does that concern you that there's, in fact, less support under this redistribution?
No, I look at the popular vote, and I think it's been 60 years since a government's come back with a higher popular vote back to Hepburn days than they did before. You look at the splits, and we know that our vote held and maybe even increased a little bit. I haven't seen the final numbers. There was some strategic voting. I don't think there has ever been a campaign when there's been so much negativity and more people voting against things. You know, the analysts will have a field day for the next little period of time. In the meantime, we've got a mandate to bring this province to even greater heights, and I look forward to doing that.
Mr. Harris, we've got a special guest here for you. Charles Harnick is sitting by. He's on our panel, and he wants to ask you a question. So, Charles, go ahead.
Premier, I really don't want to ask you a question. I just want to convey my congratulations on a marvelous victory, and best regards to you and to Janet and to the boys.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it.
Charlie wants to be your driver. He doesn't have a job now.
That's David Peterson, my guys.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, David.
Congratulations, Premier.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. You know the challenges of
Indeed,
the
I
job.
do,
You know the challenges of campaigning.
I know lonely and tough it is sometimes. And it's more. I do know this: it's more fun to win than it is to lose. I do know that for sure.
Well, thanks, David. We're going to go and celebrate with these great folks in Nipissing right now.
Mr. Harris, just before you leave, what did Janet say to you when she heard that this was going to be a Conservative majority?
Well, I mean, Janet's she's a great campaigner, and she's very proud. Told me she was very proud of me, and I told her I was very proud of her and the whole team. She was a great campaigner. She is a big believer in the common sense revolution, in the blueprint, in the agenda. She comes from those same values from her family that I come from.
Mr. Harris, thank you, and we will see you at the park
Thanks
later.
very much, Sue Hannah.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Good night.
That was, of course, Mike Harris, a Conservative majority. He comes back as the Premier into that office we saw a little bit earlier. And those two renegades over there, that was Charles Harnick and David Peterson, meshing in on my interview, but we should allow it. It's late.
Let them hijack the show.
We've got some more...
You're not interviewing us. You're pretty mean.
Go again. Let's have a look at these boards now. All 103. This is the final standing. Robin, pretty easy to understand, but take us through it so we get a clear sense.
The numbers we're seeing here are the number of seats that the Conservatives will hold. 60 is a clear majority. They only needed 52 to present a majority government to the legislature. They have 60. But as we mentioned, in redistribution, they really would have had about 72 seats if we took their old results and spread them over the new ridings. So that may be a little bit of a disappointment, but a clear majority there. 34 seats for the Liberals. Again, that allows them to be a really effective opposition. It's enough seats to have a clear voice in the legislature, especially considering the NDP's 9 total at the bottom there.
Devastating showing, of course, for the New Democrats. What does this mean for them in the House? Because, of course, to have a voice and to have some power, what you want to do is get into question period. What happens when you've got 9 seats?
It really is disastrous. You don't have the same opportunity to ask questions in question period. You don't have the same kind of representation on committees. You don't have the same kind of caucus research staff that you need to look into issues so you can put forth some of the concerns that you have in the legislature. It's going to be very difficult for them to have an effective voice in the legislature with 9 seats.
You know, if we look at this share of the vote, 45% is what the Conservatives are standing at this point, at the end of the election evening. It's what they had in 1995. The Liberals, of course, were at 31%, and they're almost at the 40 mark. But this is where the hit comes. The New Democrats used to be at 21% of the vote, total vote in 1995, and now just at 12.7%. So a lot of work to do for the New Democrats. Is it possible to rebuild? I mean, I suppose we've seen it federally, but
that's one of the questions that's going to be asked in days to come. We're looking now at the vote change board. When we look at this, the Conservatives have lost about 1 percentage points of their popular support from 1995. Not much of a change. As we said, they don't need more than that to form a majority. The Liberals are at 7.5% up. That's good for them, and they're getting all of those votes almost directly from the New Democrats. They weren't able to shake any of those Conservative voters over to their side. Mr. Harris, the Premier, when you were talking to him tonight, said something interesting about he didn't think there was a bigger majority, a percentage of the total vote since 1937. I think he was referring to Mitch Hepburn. But I'm looking at my results here.
Didn't he?
Well, 1987, Mr. Peterson had one with 47%.
47%. That's right. He's over there, too, and he's gloating, are you?
Not back to back. Not back to back. Maybe he was referring to the back to back, and that is true since 1967.
Would you stop hijacking this? You know what?
I think he was talking about. I thought he was talking about total vote, but you can correct me if you'd like to.
Robin, we were talking about the numbers and the percentages, but we've got some distinct numbers for you. Women in the House. Let me get these numbers out before we go to the panel. For the Liberals, 6 women. For the New Democrats, 3, and the Conservatives, 9. That leads up to 18. Over to you, Peter.
All right, David Peterson would like to say that it doesn't matter if it's back-to-back, that you had that highest result, and that's all that counts.
Well, thank you very much. That's very gracious of you. But it just shows the higher you go, the more you got to fall. Look, I think it's been an interesting. I think all of the leaders conduct themselves with class and grace tonight. I think it's going to be. I think Dalton was feisty and energized, and he's going to go in there and fight. And the issues are still going to be around.
We're all being very gracious, and that's a good thing. But is this the right time to talk about this evening in comparison to that American-style campaign everybody talked about and how that seemed to change this election in Ontario? Sure, there's compromise tonight, and there's nice talk from all camps tonight, but it was a different election than this province is used to seeing.
But it's a compromise. I mean, we've talked and been gracious, and I think we've agreed that everybody ran a good campaign. But while Mike Harris was talking compromise and talking about extending the olive branches, it was also very clear and very tough that there is the blueprint. We're going to go forward with it, and we're going to continue as we were.
But doesn't he have that right tonight?
Well, of course he does. But, I mean, it's a question of, do you really think that it's going to be that much different from the previous 4 years? And I hear David saying, yes, he thinks it will have to be because it's a second mandate. I'm not sure that it is possible for the common sense revolutionaries to really change the stripes.
Well, I think, again, you must reflect on the fact that 45%, which is an extraordinary percentage of vote when it's a second majority, to not see your vote drop is quite extraordinary. And I think that while you extend the olive branch, you extend it within the context of the mandate that that people gave you. And I think that the Premier will do that. I think it's incumbent upon those that he extends the olive branch to.
At the heart of this, Charles,
to work with the government, and I think that you will see that this agenda for prosperity can be very positive.
You know, Mike Harris, at the heart of it, is he saying, look, in as nice a way as he can, get with it or get over it?
No, I think Mike Harris, the Mike Harris I know, would want to work with people. I think that as Mike Harris improves the education system and improves the healthcare system, he wants the input of those that work within the system. He wants their advice on how to implement the blueprint in a way that will make education the best system in North America and anywhere for that matter, and the same with healthcare.
David Peterson.
I'm not questioning anybody's motives. Everybody I know in politics always believes in the purity of their own motives and suspects everybody else's, and that's what brings about the great debate here. I think the thing that's going to change here, as I read it tonight, Howie Hampton is going to be leading the party in the next campaign, 4 or 5 years. Dalton McGuinty clearly is going to be leading the Liberal Party. I'm not sure it's going to be that clear whether Michael's going to stay or not. And he's not going to discuss that issue tonight, obviously, why should he? But 4 years from now, he may say, look, I've had enough of this. It's a tough, grinding job. And when in a second mandate, if he's not running again, sometimes you have to take a different view of your responsibilities. No politician goes out of the way, except at election time, to make people deliberately mad. So it's going to depend on what his agenda is. He spoke about some of the national issues today, because the Premier of Ontario does have an extremely important job in the national issues and keeping this country together. And if his interests are in those areas, he can put time into those things as well. So he's in a very commanding position with his own agenda. I think it behooves him to reach out and be gentle. The opposition are obviously going to, by definition, kind of try to make him look bad, but he's got a clear majority. But he's going to set, there will be agenda items coming along that are bigger and better than the articulated common sense revolution, because the world will change and because the responsibilities of the Premier of the province are second only to the Prime Minister.
In a sentence from the three of you, what happens in Ontario after tonight, Charles? In a very quick sentence.
I think the government will continue to govern. They will be guided by the blueprint, and they will reach out to those who have to help them implement the program.
Ruth Greer.
I can't be anything but depressed and disappointed and feeling that our healthcare system, our public services and our education system and our environment continue to be at risk.
Final word to you, David Peterson, 10 seconds.
Go ahead with their agenda, and everybody will continue to fight, and the journalists will continue to hack everybody up.
Thank you all for being here. It's been a pleasure. Suhanna?
Thank you, Peter. And that is Ontario 99, live from Queen's Park. In the legislature, there will be some changes made. The Tories got their majority, but they took some hits. 3 former cabinet ministers will not be with them. Dalton McGuinty came up far short of his hopes, but he's captured more Liberal seats in a much smaller House. And the New Democrats, how will they fare without official party status? Those are stories for another day. I'm Suhanna Marchand. For all of us here, Robin Smythe, Peter Van Dusen, Jennifer Gates, and our invited guests, and you, thank you for watching. We leave you with some of the stories of the evening. Until tomorrow, good night.